Good morning. We will get started this morning with our invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance. Paul Sparks is here. He's the pastor at South Walker Church of Christ. He'll lead us in the invocation. Afterwards, I'll ask Councilman Larry McAtee to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Would everyone please stand?
Dear God, creator of heaven and earth, we come before you as we embark upon this new year and this new decade, asking your blessing upon this council, the Honorable Mick Cornett as mayor, the rest of the August group who meets with him to engage in the business and concerns of this city. We ask your blessing upon them. Bless our city that we may be able to lead safe and peaceful lives on this earth. Father, bless our days, forgive our wrongs. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Face the flag. Salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, the state of Oklahoma has something fairly new. It's the Law Enforcement Hall of Fame. And one of our former Oklahoma City police officers is going to be in that inaugural class. Would Richard Boyd come forward? Richard? We have a citation. I'll ask the clerk to read it.
Whereas Richard Boyd, a past national president of the Fraternal Order of Police, has been honored as an inaugural inductee for the Oklahoma Law Enforcement Hall of Fame. And whereas Richard Boyd is a 20-year veteran of the Oklahoma City Police Department and was a charter member of Oklahoma City Fraternal Order of Police, Lodge 123. And whereas Richard Boyd served as the first secretary for FOP Lodge 123 and went on to serve as the president. Whereas Richard Boyd was elected as state lodge president and then elected to the National Executive Board as national treasurer before being called to serve as national president for 2 terms from 1983 to 1987. Whereas, at the request of then National President Dewey Stokes, Richard Boyd also served as the first head of the Washington, D.C. Office for the Fraternal Order of Police. Now, therefore, Mick Cornett, the mayor of the city of Oklahoma City, does hereby congratulate Richard Boyd for his induction into the Oklahoma Law Enforcement Hall of Fame.
Let's show our appreciation and our acknowledgement for Richard. Thank you. Congratulations. On the first council meeting of the new year, each year, we join with the South Oklahoma City Kiwanis Club to honor our Employees of the Year. We will get started this morning with our Police Officer of the Year. Would Inspector Kevin Johnson come up? And Kevin, did you bring any friends with you? Anybody else on the force here today? Bring them all up. Let them stand up behind you up here. Oh, these guys all undercover and don't want to give away their identity? All right. What's that? Is that your pastor? Come on up. It's funny. You find out who your friends are right here at the Horseshoe. We have a resolution. I'll ask the clerk to read it as we get settled.
Whereas Inspector Kevin Johnson has been a city employee for 24 years and is an inspector in the Special Investigations Division of the Police Department. Whereas Inspector Johnson successfully created a graffiti database that police can use to identify graffiti taggers. And whereas Inspector Johnson collects and analyzes graffiti-related information, enters it into a graffiti database, and educates city employees and civic groups on graffiti issues in Oklahoma City. Whereas Inspector Johnson created a distribution list that enables law enforcement agencies, metro schools, neighborhood watch associations, and city departments to share graffiti photographs that may help identify suspects. Whereas Inspector Johnson, through his innovative and persistent investigations, has identified and arrested several graffiti taggers who have caused well over $200,000 of damages in Oklahoma City. Whereas Inspector Johnson came up with an idea, and through his hard work and dedication, he created a graffiti database that has not only become a valuable tool for law enforcement, but one that could significantly help improve the beautification of the city. And whereas this council desires to recognize Inspector Kevin Johnson for ingenuity, dedication, professionalism, and commitment to the citizens of Oklahoma City, now therefore be it resolved by the mayor and council of the city of Oklahoma City that they do hereby thank and commend Inspector Kevin Johnson, 2009 South Oklahoma City Kiwanis Club Police Officer of the Year.
Now, Kevin, this is when the suspense comes because we got to vote on this one. All right? We have a motion and a second. Cast your votes. All right, let's show our appreciation to Inspector Johnson. Next, we will honor our Fire Department Employee of the Year, Major James Teal. James, would you come down? And anyone who comes with James. James has had a very interesting life, born in Oklahoma City, but grew up in a military family and actually lived throughout the world, but has made Oklahoma City his home and now working for the Oklahoma City Fire Department, his life's work. He's been with us for 19 years. I'll ask the clerk to read the resolution.
Whereas Major James Teal has been a city employee for 19 years and is a firefighter in the Suppression Division of the Fire Department. Whereas Major Teal was asked to be the chairman of the Rapid Intervention Team Training Committee, a company of firefighters who rescue distressed firefighters who become trapped in a structure fire or building collapse. Whereas Major Teal was responsible for the Rapid Intervention Team training program, including developing the training scenarios, obtaining the props, recruiting instructors from the fire department, teaching the classes, and designing the rotation schedules. Whereas Major James Teal not only ensured that all Oklahoma City Fire Department companies participated, but also made accommodations for firefighters from surrounding fire departments to attend. Whereas Major James Teal displayed tireless and steadfast leadership during this 8th-month project, and although other instructors were available, he was present at each training session from beginning to completion. Whereas Major Teal throughout this extremely busy year never wavered to his commitment and dedication to his fellow firefighters, and each day after a full day of training, Major Teal would return to his normal duties at the fire station. Whereas Major Teal has a positive, energetic attitude and is an exemplary firefighter who also works with homeless shelters in Oklahoma City, ministering to those in need. And whereas this council desires to recognize Major James Teal for his commitment, dedication to his profession, and the safety of the citizens of Oklahoma City. Now therefore be it resolved by the mayor and council of the city of Oklahoma City that they do hereby thank and commend Major James Teal, 2009 South Oklahoma City Kiwanis Club Firefighter of the Year.
I bet we can get a unanimous vote on this one, too. What do you bet? We have a motion and a second? All right, cast your votes. And it passed unanimously. Let's show our appreciation to Major Teal.
Simply and basically, I'd like to receive this award on behalf of the entire Oklahoma City Fire Department. Every single member of the fire department is of like nature and attitude. Thank you.
Let's show our appreciation again. Thank you very much. And now, our South Oklahoma City Kiwanis Club Employee of the Year honors continue with Joseph Dowdell. Joseph, you want to come up? Joe? There he is. No one ever wants to sit on the front row, and they have a choice, Joe. I noticed you were hiding back there on row 5. Joe's been with us 15 years and is largely in charge of this particular building and keeping it in the same order that it was handed down to us from previous generations. We have a resolution. I'll have the clerk to read it.
Whereas Joseph Dowdell has been a city employee for 15 years and is a building maintenance mechanic in the Building Management Division of the General Services Department. Whereas Joseph Dowdell maintains the building operations, plumbing, HVAC, lighting, and electrical systems and general repairs in City Hall and 100 North Walker and maintains the City Hall fountain. Whereas Joe's developed an expertise in operating the automated building system that controls the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning in 13 city buildings and responds to ABS system alarms 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because essential equipment could be damaged if repairs are not made in a timely manner. Whereas Joseph Dowdell immediately responded to a sudden power loss at the 100 North Walker building at 3:05 p.m. on April 10, 2009, and restored the backup power system that supports the air conditioning and production servers. As a result of his knowledge of the system and quick response, no equipment or data was lost due to the temperature change. Whereas Joseph Dowdell diligently responds to building system issues and willingly goes the extra mile to ensure the comfort of his tenants and the safety of the data stored on systems in the buildings. Whereas his council desires to recognize Joseph Dowdell for his innovative motivation and willingness to go the extra mile to make the best use of city resources. Now therefore be it resolved by the mayor and council of the city of Oklahoma City that they do hereby thank and commend Joseph Dowdell, the 2009 South Oklahoma City Kiwanis Club Employee of the Year.
All right, let's have a vote on Joe's resolution. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Let's show our appreciation to Joe. Joe, you can imagine the difficulty in trying to look after a building that is as old as this building. We're in our 8th decade in City Hall, and in this past year, we had a mouse that ran through my office one day, and I didn't know what to do, but apparently the thing to do when you have a mouse in your office is to call Joe. And Joe came down, and I haven't seen the mouse since. Don't know where Joe and the mouse ended up, but Joe took care of it. Joe, thank you very much for your service to Oklahoma City. We're on item 4 of the council agenda. Item 4 is the Journal of Council Proceedings. Item A is to receive the Journal of Council Proceedings for December 22nd, and item B is to approve the Journal of Council Proceedings for December 15th. We have a motion and a second. Any comments or questions on the journals? All right, cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 5 is request for uncontested continuances.
Mayor, a couple this morning, starting on page 16, under item 8G1C, 4223 Lenox Avenue, we ask that that be stricken. The owner has removed. And under item 8H1 on page 17, B, 1300 Fairfax Circle, we ask that that be stricken. The owner is secured. Item C, 8420 North Harvey, we ask that that be stricken. The owner has secured. Item G, 601 Oakdale Drive, we ask that that be stricken. The owner has secured. Item J, 3721 William Street, we ask that that be stricken. The owner has secured. Item Q, 3010 Southwest 16th Street, we ask that that be stricken. We will rework that as dilapidated. Item U, 3531 Southwest 27th Street, we ask that that be stricken. The owner has secured. Item W, 2732 Southeast 48th Street, we ask that that be stricken. The owner has secured. And then on page 20, item 801D, that's an items for denial. 801D, it's claimed by Paul Odom, and we ask that be deferred until January 19th.
Okay. Any other requests for uncontested continuances? All right, we'll recess the council meeting, convene as the Oklahoma City Municipal Facilities Authority. All right, we have a motion and a second. Looks like all 3 items are in order. Any comments or questions on these items in the MFA? All right, cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Adjourn OCMFA, convene as the Oklahoma City Public Property Authority. There are 4 items. Okay, we have a motion and a second on the PPA. Are there any comments or questions here? All right, cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Adjourn OCPPA, reconvene the council meeting with the Oklahoma City Environmental Assistance Trust. We have 1 item. Okay, any comments or questions on the OCEAT?
Just a comment, if I could, since this subject has come up, City Manager, if you could talk to Waste Management. the recycle pickup, when things are that are in the blue bins that are not allowed, at least out in my area, we seem to have the person picking them up will throw them out onto the yard, and then they get blown around. So I'm not questioning that they're whether they should take stuff that's not allowed or not, but can they at least put it back in the little blue, or if there's a big blue beside it, could they put it in it, or could we do something more than just throw it out on the yard to be blown around?
Wasn't aware of that. I'd be happy to look into that.
Thanks, Gary. Now let's vote on the EAT. Passed unanimously. Adjourn OCEAT. Reconvene the council meeting with the consent docket. All right. We have a motion and a second. Are there any individual considerations?
Your Honor, E.3 and Q.1.
Okay. All right, Pat, you want to get us started with E3?
E3, yes, sir, Your Honor. Just a question on how the process would work in this particular item. This is a resolution authorizing the purchase of vehicles under a state contract. And we are looking at about $6 million. When we select a vehicle that needs to be purchased or determine that we need to purchase a vehicle, how do we decide which of the vendors we go to on this sort of thing? Do we have a bidding process within that, or just a rotating system? I just out of curiosity, I wonder how that process worked.
Generally, we determine the vehicles that meet the specifications to take the lowest price in that category.
Okay, so we essentially use the state contract price as the ceiling, if you will, and then try to go in below that?
No, we don't negotiate with them after the fact. Generally, we can't. That's the best price that's out there.
Okay.
I think a number of these is, for example, is police vehicles. We generally buy a lot of police vehicles off the state contract because they have a large amount.
I understand that process, but we've got, like, for instance, if we wanted to buy a police vehicle, a Ford Crown Victoria, there's several Ford dealers on this list. How do we determine which Ford dealer we go to make that purchase? That's my question, how that process works.
I can't answer that.
Well, it's not a big question, and you can have somebody give me an answer afterwards, but I just was curious as to how the process works. And on, Your Honor, this is a library project. It's the Northwest Library on 122nd Street. This is left over from the 2000 bond issue authorization. There was not enough money, so it was additional monies were committed in the 2007 bond issue. The project is much anticipated and in high demand in that area. People have been waiting a long time. And all I would ask is that we do everything we can to expedite the process, get this thing started as quickly as we can. We've got the site selected, it's been determined, and it's just a matter of letting the construction contract. And if we can move that along as quickly as we can, I would appreciate that.
We'll accept bids on that, I think later this month or early February, and we anticipate awarding a contract in February and getting under construction as soon as possible.
Any other comments or questions on the consent docket? All right, we have a motion and a second. Cast your votes. It passes unanimously. Nothing on the concurrence docket today, so we're on to item 8. These are items that require a separate vote. First is a zoning case in Ward 3. The address is 1700 South Council Road. Has that item been deferred? Okay. That item has been deferred until January 19th, so 2 weeks from today. On to item 8B. This involves the changing of a building height inside a spud. It's in Ward 7 at 401 North Lincoln Boulevard. Is there anyone here wishing to speak on this item 8B today? No one's here. Jim, is there any reason to believe that Skip has issues with this?
I understand Mr. Kelly is fine with this item.
Okay. How about a motion then?
I'd move approval. Second.
Cast your votes on item 8B. Passed unanimously. Item 8C is a special permit to operate an outdoor ice rink along I-35 in Ward 4. The address is 8000 South I-35. Pete, you okay with this? I don't think they need any refrigeration equipment today to have an outdoor ice rink. Anyone here wishing to speak on this item, 8C? All right, Pete, you want to make a motion? All right, cast your votes on 8C. Passed unanimously. Item 8D is designed to close an alley in Ward 6. The address is very close to the intersection of Sheridan between Fred Jones and Chartel. Meg?
I understand that the Planning Commission passed this unanimously. I haven't had any protests. I think originally maybe there was one person that was a little bit concerned about it, and they've worked that out.
That's correct. That was all resolved.
So we're basically talking about putting some fencing on either side of the alleys to
Control access.
to secure the buildings a little bit. I would move approval of the item.
All right, we have a motion and a second. We're voting on item 8D. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 8E has to do with LED signs. As background, I'll point out that we've had some issues on this in the past. We've had a lot of technology changes in the past few years that have caused cities all across the country to revisit their sign ordinances. We put together a task force. Gary and Pete served on the committee along with the business community. Pete, I think you chaired that committee. Anything you want to say on behalf of the committee's work?
Well, I certainly appreciate it. This went on for a long time, and to some extent got technically beyond either my capacity to understand it or my willingness to continue to listen. But it was. I so much appreciate the private sector's input into the thing. They were regularly attended and very knowledgeable and helpful in trying to put the thing together. And it is my understanding, though, today that there are those on the council that would like to have the matter continued for a while again. I had thought it had been continued once before, but it has not. It was just on for introduction the first time. I know we have some people from the committee here, and I guess.
Yeah, we have some people that have signed up to speak, and I think we have a couple of council people that might want to speak on the issue.
We did move the acceptance date. It was on for introduction, and it would have been 2 weeks later would have been accepted, but we moved that date up to today.
Okay. Well, we have a presentation from staff that I think can kind of give everybody up to speed.
Okay.
Russell, do you want to come forward and lead us through this particular presentation?
Russell Klaus, Planning Director. What I'd like to, I don't have a screen though. So.
Here we go.
As Gary had intimated, this process has been going on for some time now. You formulated the task force in 2007, so it has been deliberating for a fairly long period of time, on and off, because in between the task force's efforts, it's gone to the Planning Commission for review as well, and now it's finally made it to City Council for consideration. I'm going to talk about the origins of the ordinance in terms of why the task force was formed to examine the ordinance, what the history and the chronology of the ordinance formation is, and primarily what the main provisions of the ordinance are. And we have some video clips in here that illustrate what the different levels of operation will be for the electronic message displays, and then what the Planning Commission recommendations are. Do we have a presentation? As Gary, I think as the Mayor had indicated, there were a number of different representatives on the task force, and the intent there was to make sure that we had representation from everybody who had a stake in this particular issue. So we had council members, we had Planning Commissioner Chairman John Yokel on there, representatives of the sign industry, the business community, the Traffic Commission, Planning Department and Public Works, as well as municipal councillors as well. Like we're operational. The task force, when it initially met for approximately 6 months. As a result of their recommendations and findings, an ordinance was prepared that was presented to the Planning Commission Urban Development Committee for consideration in 2008 initially. I did a presentation to the City Council in December of 2008 where I presented the findings and recommendations of the task force along with some of the concerns that were being expressed by the Planning Commission. It was referred back to staff. Planning Commission provided further deliberation on the ordinance, after which it was then taken back. The LED task force was reformed in September and October of last year, and they made final amendments to the ordinance, which is what you have before you today. The primary changes to the sign code relate to electronic message display definitions in the ordinance. The issue that we had in being able to consider permit applications for electronic signs was that the sign ordinance really did not recognize current technology, so it was unable to really respond to applications for electronic signs. So there are a number of definitions that have been inserted into the ordinance now which clarify what an electronic sign is and how it operates, the hours, setbacks, etc. So all of that is in there. Previously, the Traffic Commission was responsible for reviewing all electronic signs in the sense that they were then called flashing or intermittent signs. That responsibility has now been removed from the Traffic Commission. They do not have to automatically review all electronic sign applications. They still have the capacity, if necessary, to review a sign if it's considered to be a traffic problem, if it's a distraction to traffic. So they have that capacity. Of course, they will be doing that after the sign was constructed. The proposed ordinance amendments establish the operational standards for electronic signs, and those operational standards will need to be met within 30 days of the adoption of the ordinance. And those operational standards are constructed according to the different zoning districts. The primary consideration with electronic signs is their operation. There are three levels of operation that are proposed in the ordinance. The first level is one that you're probably familiar with the billboards that we see on the highways now. That is a sign that has no visual movement in it. It changes no more than every 8 seconds. So it's a static sign, looks like an ordinary paper sign, except that it's electronic. It's not meant to demonstrate any kind of movement. Although it will dissolve or transition, it's meant to be very subtle in the way that it does that. Level 2 are signs that travel in, so the message will travel in from the side or from the top, or it will scroll in and out. It's meant to be a sequencing of a particular message, so that not all the message is on the screen at any one point in time. Again, it is not yet full animation. Level 3 is what we're proposing as full animation. So that could be full live-action video or animated graphics. And that's probably the sign that's had the most discussion during this entire process. This is the Level 1 sign. This one here is at the Bricktown Ballpark. You can see that it's transitioning in and out. There's no movement associated with that sign. It's just a message. The second sign is a Sonic sign, and then we have a Walgreens sign. Again, it's simply a simple transition from one message to the other. Again, with the 8-second transition. Level 2, this is the Bank 7 sign on the north side of Chesapeake at 63rd and Western. You can see that the message is traveling in from one side to the other. Again, no visual movement, but a more mobile presentation of the message. This is Habitat Renovation Station on North Broadway. I think this is probably the genesis of the electronic signs. I think these were the first signs to appear, and they've evolved since that point in time. The message is presented gradually. This sign we actually took in more. It's a larger sign. It's over 100 square feet. Most of those other smaller signs are less than 50 feet, but you see the message here. It's coming in from basically all angles. And this is Level 3. This is the Toby Keith sign, over 100 square feet again, in Bricktown. This is full animation. This sign here is an OnQ at Northeast 23rd and Santa Fe, advertising the benefits of Coca-Cola. That's an animated sign, a lot of movement in the sign, and a lot of color. And then the third sign is at the Bob Mills Furniture Warehouse on Reno. Again, a mixture of graphic and other animation forms, but the sense is there that the sign is the electronic elements of it are fully moving.
I'm sorry, do you know what size that Bob Mills?
The Bob Mills sign is 84 square feet.
84 square feet. And we're proposing in this up to 200 square feet?
We will be proposing up to 200 square feet. That's what the ordinance includes. There are general provisions that relate to the operation of electronic signs. These relate to illumination and setback. We are trying, the intent with the task force and clearly a concern of the Planning Commission as well was to try and ensure that there wasn't a problem in terms of the adjacent operators of any particular facility or in particular residential areas. So in the residential areas, it's proposed the illumination would be limited to 100 nighttime nits, and nits is a technical term in the sign industry. It's essentially a nit is equivalent to what we used to know as a foot candle. So it's the illumination provided by a single candle. So 100 nighttime nits would be the equivalent of 100 candles. So there are some provisions to include signs within residential areas. Those are restricted to a fairly dull illumination of 100 nits. Non-residential areas would be permitted up to 500 nits in the nighttime, and that's essentially from dusk till dawn. And then in the daytime, to compensate for the fact that on very bright days, you need an illumination of approximately 6,500 nits to be able to be seen. Setback, we have different setbacks according to the different zoning districts, but the minimum setback would be 50 feet from a residential area. And then there was also concern expressed that if the sign was to malfunction, that it was programmed to default to a static sign. So it would default to that level 1 sign where it would just be a straight screen.
Russell, may I, on the minimum 50-foot setback from residential area, define residential area. Is that on R1?
Residential zoning. Residential zoning.
So it's anything that's zoned R1 it needs to be 50 feet setback from R1 area?
R1 through R4.
Okay, so a church typically is
a church,
R1?
Yes. The residential area is essentially meant to accommodate schools and churches, which are common uses within residential districts.
Okay, so the 50-foot setback, how would you, from what, for instance, on a church lot?
From the sign to the residential zoning boundary.
Okay, but a church is R1 zoning.
Correct.
Okay, so where would the 50-foot setback on a church sign, what 50 feet back from where? It's on, the church is on an R1 site. So if it wants to put a sign.
Within the residential district, you can operate level 1 signs. So I don't know if it's adjacent. So it would be 50-foot adjacent. So it is an adjacency of 50 feet.
Adjacent to the R1 zoning?
Correct.
So it may be a long ways from the church.
A long way from the church? I'm not.
The church is in an R1 area.
Correct.
Okay? They want to put up a LED sign.
Right.
Where can they put that? On their property?
On their property, as long as there was a 50-foot separation from the adjoining residentially zoned area.
So I'm confused. That's okay. I'm easily confused.
There has to be 50 feet of separation between the sign and the closest residence?
Between the closest residential property.
Okay. But 50 feet between the sign and the first private property.
Okay, so the R1 part doesn't really apply. It's from a residence.
No, it actually is the residential zoning. So if you had a church, and on either side of it there were houses, and that church had a frontage of 200 feet, then you would have a 50-foot, you would have 100 feet there along their frontage with 50 feet on either side where they would be able to place the sign.
Okay, even though the church site itself was R1?
Yes.
Okay.
How large could that sign be on that church property?
That's 100 square feet in the residential areas.
So the church can only have level 1?
Correct. And they have a different operational standard as well, which we'll get into, but that sign message is not able to change any more than every 2 hours. If you had it changing every 8, there was a concern that if the message changed every 8 seconds, which is a normal level 1 operation, that would get a little annoying to the residential areas. So the intent is to be able to change the message, but only every 2 hours.
Why don't I make a list of those who have questions first, so we can get some sort of order here as we review this issue. Anybody else on council have questions? Yeah, Brian.
Just to follow up to that, if they can comply, excuse me, if a church can comply with the level 2 distance requirements, then can they apply for a level 2 sign? I mean, what I see is I see churches and schools being treated differently than another enterprise that wants one of these signs just because of their proximity to a residential neighborhood. But if that church was not a church, if it was a Sonic and it was in exactly that same spot, they would be able to apply for a level 2 or level 3 sign.
The churches and schools are, the difference between residential areas and commercial industrial areas, if the school was on an arterial or a section line road, for example, then they would be able to meet the terms provided for. That's a greater level of operation that they're permitted along those roads. The intent with the level 1 within the residential districts is to protect the residential areas. So those are uses that occur within the residential areas, and therefore the operation of those signs within the residential areas needed to be less than what you could do if you were on a more heavily traveled street.
So if they can comply with a level 2 or level 3 requirement, then they can actually apply for that? Am I hearing that correctly?
If they are eligible, if they're not, enclosed within the residential district, but they've got frontage on an arterial or section line road, yes.
All right. Russell, what are other cities doing? Are the recommendations from our committee in line with what goes on in Dallas or Los Angeles or Kansas City?
The task force looked at a lot of different cities, and it was really hard to find anything that was consistent across the board. They all had completely different views of it, from the Las Vegas approach, where it's mandatory to have signs, to other communities where these signs are not permitted at all.
So the technological advances are just now being dealt with by cities across the country. Are we a little bit ahead of the game in trying to deal with this?
We are. We've spent more time in looking at what the issues are associated with signs than any of our other peer cities in the local area or even within the region.
Is there any legal exposure to the moving video signs as far as the distraction of a driver? Is there any history of that? And Kenny, I'll bring you into this conversation if that seems appropriate. But if you have moving video and it is a distraction to drivers, could there be any legal exposure for the property owner or the city who might allow the use?
The city, no. There's an exception in the Tort Claims Act that just for the issuance of a permit that the city is not liable in tort. For the property owner, probably not, but
possibly.
Possibly.
Okay.
Mayor, could I just ask a question? Is it not the case that some of our surrounding communities, Edmond has restricted the use of these signs, and Norman?
I believe theirs are more restrictive than ours. Mike, did you look at those? Edmond, what were their sign requirements? I'm not familiar with them myself.
Edmond currently restricts these types of signs. They are looking at an amendment that would allow them for 8 seconds, but that really hasn't even processed through their review. Norman, I think Norman restricts them, but Moore allows them. We saw an example one in Moore. We looked at it, and it's really all over the place. I mean, there's no consistency with how they regulate them.
In those communities that are looking at them, square footage-wise, is the Oklahoma City proposed ordinance greater than or consistent with what you're seeing?
it's really hard to say. Most of the surrounding communities, if you take out Edmond, have that similar 200 square foot or larger sign, so they'd probably be consistent, but it's really, I mean, we really can't compare it because we don't have good examples to compare it to.
Russell, how are existing signs impacted by this ordinance?
There are some provisions in here that relate to both the electronic signs and the existing signs, particularly in relation to size and setback and that formula for calculating size.
Would they all be grandfathered in?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I know we have a number of people that have signed up to speak, but just so I'm clear on where we are, we put together a committee. The committee came through with recommendations. Those recommendations were put before the Planning Commission. They were not accepted by the Planning Commission.
Planning Commission did disagree with a number of them. Now, in the final ordinance, some of the recommendations have been adopted that the Planning Commission asked for, and some have not.
Okay, so there's been some modification as it comes through council.
I think the primary difference relates to the operation and the placement of the level 2 and 3 signs.
Okay. I suspect we might be headed toward a deferral today, but we have citizens who signed up to speak. I'd like to hear from them so they don't feel like they've wasted an opportunity to spend their morning down here with us. And also to then see what council wants to do going forward.
May I
sure, Russell.
Yeah, I just wanted to go through the rest of the zoning districts in terms of what's permitted. So, as I was talking about in the residential zoning, the only sign permitted there is level 1, and that's with the 2-hour change operation. The sign size within residential zoning in the minor streets has not changed, so they can have 100 square feet with a maximum 8-foot high sign. Residential zoning is fronting onto major streets, and this is going to Councilman Walter's question. There the signs are permitted at 50% of the currently allowable sign size, so that would be 50 square feet. Hours of operation would be from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., and there's a requirement there for 150-foot separation from residentially zoned property. Office and C1 zoning, pretty similar provisions. Level 2, again, is permitted. 50% of the sign area. You could get a slightly larger sign there, up to 75 square feet. Hours of operation a little bit longer, 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., and again, 150-foot separation. And it's the commercial and industrial zoning, the C2 and above, where the level 2 and level 3 are permitted, up to a sign size of 200 square feet. Some of the other provisions that relate to operation for level 2 and 3, signs that are up to 50 square feet would require a 100-foot separation from residentially zoned areas. Signs that are over 50 square feet would require a 200-foot separation from residential and a 300-foot setback from areas that are zoned historic preservation or historic landmark. That provision, in addition to the next one, which is the 50-foot setback from the intersection, were recommendations from the Planning Commission that have been included in the final ordinance. There's also a requirement there for a 25-foot setback from the curb. Signs have also been reduced in response to the task force's recommendations, whereas currently you are allowed to provide for 2 square feet of display for a sign for every 1 linear foot of frontage. That has been reduced to 1.5 square feet per 1 linear foot of frontage. So in essence, before you only had to have 100 feet of frontage to get a 200 square foot sign. Now you require about 133 square feet. And then we also changed the height provisions. The proposed provisions relate to, again, that formula between the amount of linear frontage and height. So anything between 0 and 100 feet of linear frontage, you have a 20-foot sign. Between 100 and 230, so on up to over 300 feet, where you would be able to have a 50-foot high sign. That's only currently permitted along freeways. These are the Planning Commission recommendations. As I said, their primary concern related to the operation of level 2 and level 3 signs. They propose that those be restricted to the downtown area. Signs over 50 square feet would require a special exception from the Board of Adjustment, and there are other provisions there which didn't attract as much discussion, but it really relates to the sign size and operation. They were concerned that these would cause traffic distractions, is the question that you raised, Mayor, and that there would be that they would be considered a nuisance in anywhere where you had a residential area or for adjacent properties. So those were the primary concerns of the Planning Commission. The original task force recommendations had recommended 350 square feet for the size of these signs. Planning Commission recommended 50 feet, and we ended up with 200 square feet. So that was the sort of the genesis of the final ordinance.
Russell, was any consideration given to special regulations for appearance corridor?
We are working separately on appearance standards, which includes appearance corridors, and we were waiting for the finalization of this ordinance before we incorporate that in there. We don't have recommendations at this point in time, but that has been taken into consideration.
Okay. Yeah, Gary?
A couple of questions. On this slide here, I want people to note that there are a number of those things the Planning Commission recommended that we did put a change into the ordinance on the setbacks and so on and so forth. Russell, back up one, please. The 1.5 proposed is only for under 100 foot of frontage. If you have over 100 foot of frontage, it's 1 for 1. Is that right?
Is that right?
It's 200 maximum. Item number 4 here, display surface area shall be permitted on the basis of 1 square foot of sign for each 1 lineal foot of frontage for sites with less than 100 foot and 1.5 for over. I'm sorry, I said it backwards, but the 1 for, if you're under 100 foot, it's 1 for 1.
Right.
Yeah, Larry?
The task force came up with their recommendations. The Planning Commission didn't like them. Does the task force totally endorse the recommendations that we're looking at right now?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mayor?
Meg, you want to speak before?
Well, I just have a very quick question. And with regard to the task force, we talked about staff member. I know we had some great council members on the committee. We also had industry folks. We had businesses. Did we have any of the neighborhood partners? I didn't hear Oklahoma City Beautiful involved. I didn't hear the Neighborhood Alliance. Any of the folks that typically weigh in on these kinds of discussions about appearance?
I came into the task force right at the tail end of the first phase. I only went to the last meeting, so I don't know if they were invited onto the task force or not. I'd have to defer. Do you know, Bob?
It was really council, a traffic commissioner, the planning director, and then business, one representative sign industry, and then business related, and the chairman of the Planning Commission.
But those particular organizations were...
But there weren't any...
Pete?
One of the things that we spent a lot of time trying to do is to try to draft an ordinance that would make it simpler for someone to approach the city with regard to getting a permit for a sign. What we discovered in the process was that the process of getting a sign was it was highly a lot of judgment was being exercised at the city, the staff level, about what was permitted and what wasn't permitted. And so we spent a lot of time trying to get the ordinance into kind of a this goes and this doesn't go kind of a situation. So a person in the sign business or a business that wanted to put up a sign could look at the ordinance and determine whether their sign was going to work or not. And so that's one of the things that we haven't commented on today, but a lot of energy was to put into trying to make this more business friendly for the people that are in the industry and for the people that put the signs up. And I think we've done a pretty good job of doing that. I think at least it's clarified much more than it was when we started.
Okay. We're ready to hear from the citizens. Anybody with questions for Russell? All right, Russell, you want to have a seat at least momentarily? Leslie Batchelor?
Thank you very much,
Good
Mr.
morning,
Mayor.
Leslie, and I'll remind you and everyone else that comes forward, we will need your name and address for the record.
My name is Leslie Batchelor. I live at 409 Northwest 19th Street. I'm the immediate past president of the Heritage Hills Neighborhood Association. I'm here today to ask council to please defer this matter so that there could be an opportunity for additional public input. We appreciate the time that the task force has spent working on this, and I don't discount that. However, just speaking as a private citizen, this kind of snuck up on us. We didn't realize the potential implications for our neighborhoods. I mean, even the level 1 signs could be in the residential areas, which is a concern for us. We're also very protective of the fledgling neighborhood commercial districts that we're seeing, Western Avenue, 23rd Street, Midtown, the Plaza District. And while those are commercial areas, they're a different sort of commercial area, I think, than Memorial Road or some of the bigger corridors. We would request an opportunity to formally be part of the process, either as neighborhood representatives or the Neighborhood Alliance, someone to speak for the residential interests involved here, and consider whether this broad approach is the best step to take at this time, or if perhaps we could look at a more phased approach, something a more tentative initial step into this brave new world of electronic signs. Perhaps something along the lines of what the Planning Commission has proposed, perhaps a smaller area initially to see what the impact of these signs might be. It seems to me it's the sort of thing where it's hard to go backwards once we've taken such a large step forward. So if we could look at other options and consider the residential impacts, we would be most grateful.
All right. Thanks, Leslie. George McQuiston. Bill Fair.
Bill Fair, 401 North Ann Arbor. I was part of the task force. And the only thing I'd say to the residential, we were real sensitive to the residential. And the only thing you can put in the residential is a static sign. Just like any sign you have now, you can put a static sign up with a changeable copy board that you can have all kinds of different things they can hang off of them, and they can look really, really bad. Aesthetically, these signs are better looking, they're cleaner, and they'll be an asset to a residential church, and churches and schools are the only thing that can be put in a residential. So dragging this thing on and on and on is not in the best interest of the city. I just took a road trip to New Orleans, and these signs are all the way to New Orleans and back. Dallas has them, Shreveport has them, Metairie has them, New Orleans has them. It's something that if we're going to be a big league city, we need to step up and be a big league city. And that's all I have to add.
All right. Bill, thank you. Dennis Box.
Thank you, Mayor. Members of Council, Dennis Fox, 522 Colcord Drive. I'm here with Chad Raymond, who is an executive with Mathis Brothers. We have no objection to the ordinance as submitted, with one exception. If you'll recall, approximately a year and a half, 2 years ago, we came to you along with 3 other clients and had an appeal from the Traffic Commission. This council approved the sign and signs that exist now. In response to the question about nonconformity, Mayor, that you asked, there is a provision in the ordinance that allows for nonconformity on PUDs, but it doesn't provide for that same nonconformity in regard to council action. So what we would ask is that this ordinance be modified to allow the existing signs that we've spent over $500,000 on to remain, and the rest of the conditions in the ordinance we're satisfied with.
Okay. Russell, is that not addressed already?
There was a provision at the request of Councilman Miles to grandfather in the existing signs that were over the 200 square feet for the size of the sign. I believe that that they would be able to operate at 350 square feet of level 3 operation within the size of that sign.
Here's the problem with that. As an example, our sign on the highway in an industrial district is 525 square feet. So what are you going to do? Are you going to have somebody calculate, well, you can have 350 and then the outline area can't be operated the same way that 350 square feet is operated? All we would ask is that if it's been approved before, we're really dealing with vested rights and nonconformity, that the entirety of the sign have the same regulations placed on it.
How many signs are we discussing here in the city?
I think there's only 3.
Okay.
I think that's accurate.
And
that's something
actually,
we can look at.
Mayor, is it not the 3 or 4? I thought it was 4, but is it not the signs, the only ones we're talking about, is it not the signs that we approved on the Traffic Commission appeals? There's not any other signs besides those that would fit this category?
I think that is accurate. Yeah. And I think there were 5.
5.
That's one.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
How many were there? 6?
The 3, 5, 6.
It's an option.
The municipal councilor I think, has a solution where we can amend the ordinance to read that the signs are allowed and add the wording, or if by a vote of the previous vote by the councilors, to allow those. It certainly was, I don't believe I'm misstating, Pete, it was the intent of the task force to allow those signs that are permitted currently and have been approved to allow to continue.
I've got the wording on that if you want it, whenever you want.
I think we just need to make sure.
Well, those signs are kind of a unique niche.
Right.
If there was a problem, in fact, that may be, to some extent, what generated a lot of what we're talking about now. It was that controversy that generated the council approval of those signs. And if we really are sure that's the only signs we're talking about, it doesn't seem to me to be too difficult to include them in the process, since the council's already voted to approve them.
Russell, if a council person wanted to tweak the ordinance by exempting or altering the ordinance as it reads in regard to a specific corridor in their ward, how easily would that be to do? And do we have existing precedent in other things that we exempt existing corridors for other beautification reasons?
Well, we can do that. We have done that. The design districts are an example.
So that's possible over the next couple of weeks, that if specific council people have areas of their ward they're trying to protect, or that they're very concerned about putting this in right now. You know, you could always do it a year now for 5 years from now, but as someone else pointed out, once you put this in, it's kind of difficult to go back. If there are council people who are concerned about specific corridors in the next 2 weeks, we can address that, and then bring this back to council.
I would assume so. I'll defer to Kenny if he disagrees with that.
All right. Everybody okay then with where we are? Yeah, Brian.
I have a question regarding the grandfathering. Take the case that Dennis brought up with Mathis Brothers. Is that considered a grandfathered sign? Is that what we're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. So when technology changes and they want to update that sign, will they still be allowed the 525, or will they have to revert to the 300?
Well, if we change the ordinance to permit it at the 525 or whatever the size of that sign is, then unless that new technology, perhaps we get 3D technology, that we would, I think we'd have to revisit at that point in time. I don't know that the existing static electronic technology, as we're controlling it for illumination, et cetera, that it would fall out of being grandfathered.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is if they have designed a sign now that is allowed at 525, and at some point in the future they decide to change that sign to a different sign, will they still be allowed the 525, or will that revert back to the smaller sign?
If they do something that requires a new permit, then they would be under this ordinance that's adopted.
Okay.
So they're grandfathered for that 525, but if they come up with a technology that requires them to change out that sign and put a new one and get a permit, then they would have to comply with this one.
Okay.
Yeah, Larry?
Unless they were to request a variance and go before the Board of Adjustment for a special permit.
They could do that. Yeah.
On this grandfathering, I guess I've gotten confused in this whole thing. I thought that what grandfathering meant is if I had a sign today on any street or any location, and I was operating, and I was permitted to operate that, and maybe I was scrolling, or maybe even I had the cartoon-type characters on there, that I would be able, even though that didn't conform maybe to today's ordinance, I could continue to operate that sign at the size and at the kind of operation that I was involved in today. Is that true or not?
Well, they are grandfathered for size. Operations, if they're not operating according to the new standards, then they would need to come in conformance with the operating standards of the ordinance as proposed.
So the fact that I'm operating it today in one way, as far as the number of seconds that the sign might change,
right,
if that didn't conform to the new ordinance, I'd have to cut back.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, I think part of that, though, is the technology advances. That we had our existing sign ordinances didn't address a lot of the opportunities of today's sign technology. And so some people have signs and are operating them in fairly aggressive manners that we've never dealt with before. And so those signs can be reprogrammed. You wouldn't necessarily have to buy a new sign to adhere to the legislation that we're...
If you have the LED technology, you can program at level 1, 2, and 3, so that wouldn't be an issue. I mean, the existing sign ordinance really related to turning signs on and off rapidly.
Right. So in general, though, we're not requiring someone to go get a new sign, but we might challenge them to program it differently.
Correct.
That make sense? Sam? No.
I'd like to just, for sake of application, if we were to apply this today, the proposed ordinance, and I want to say first that this task for the past year that Pete and Gary have chaired has been an enormous task, and I don't envy what they've been through. Previous to that year's work, I chaired Task Force on Billboards. I see James Milner walking out now. He was part of the industry side of that task force. And it wasn't any fun, but it didn't have by any means the scope and the complexity that this proposition does. And when I raised last couple of meetings ago at the introduction of this ordinance, the concern about just the gross square footage, that I'd like us to look a little more closely at what we allow when we say 200 square feet. And I asked the staff since the last meeting, would they just prepare for me in a 1-mile stretch in an area that I'm spending a lot of time in, that we're investing a lot of money in this city, and Mayor, this may get to your corridor consideration. Mm-hmm. That's this Western Avenue section that you have, Council, I have little maps drawn up for you. This 1-mile section, which is part of a multi-million-dollar streetscape that's in place, I want to just walk through this to show you what is the application when we apply by parcel this proposed ordinance. In this 1-mile stretch, we have the Chesapeake campus to the north, MidFirst Bank, their premier bank there on Western. We have 2 neighborhoods that front Western Avenue. Spent a lot of time with Meadowbrook, invested a lot of staff time in the last couple of years working with them in Chesapeake. The old established Brookhaven to the south of that, McGinnis High School campus, all within this 1-mile stretch. Now, let me just say, to point out, if we walk through this 1-mile stretch, here's what we could have. At the top north of the stretch, at 63rd and Western, we have the old schoolhouse there. That could permit an electronic message sign of continuous scroll up to 200 feet. The athletic field just south of that, across from Chesapeake, that Chesapeake owns, their athletic field, allow another sign up to 200 square feet. South of that is the funeral home and the parking lot on Western Avenue, a 200-foot sign there. South of Classen Boulevard and Western is a 3-story office complex that could allow up to 200 square feet. South of that is Flips and across from Mid-First Bank, which would be prohibited from signage, as would Chesapeake because of their PUD restrictions, but they would be looking across the street potentially at a 200-square-foot sign, maximum sign, at Flips. South of Flips is a title company on the corner of Northwest 57th and Grand. That could allow up to 200 square feet. The Split T Plaza, the same. Sonic, which now has, and this is the point I want to make, right in the middle of this 1 mile section is an existing Sonic with a permitted electronic sign. That's the typical Sonic sign throughout the city, and it's 25 square feet. They would be allowed, and I can't see why Sonic wouldn't just move on up, they would be allowed at that same location a 208 times the size square foot electronic message sign. Across the street is a vacant triangle corner there at Western and Grand, 200 foot. Equipment building south of that, two-story, would allow up to 150 feet. Beacon Storage south of them, 200 feet. One Western Plaza coming down south, just north of the Deep Fork Restaurant, up to 200 square feet. The Deep Fork Restaurant, up to 200 square. And I could take some of this south of the Northwest Highway down Western. I think that makes the point. What I'd like to see, Mayor, is some application in some of our sensitive areas. And I don't want to make this just a Ward 2 matter, because I think it has much broader implications in Ward 2. We have areas like this all over the city. Up north at Memorial Road. What's that going to open up? What about Lincoln Boulevard? Pristine area that is coming from the north of the Capitol that we've tried to protect in terms of our redevelopment opportunities there. What would that open up? South side, south of I-240, Western and Pennsylvania stretches. I think there are just a number of such applications when we look at it parcel by parcel. And as Pete says, without question, this ordinance goes a long way to help the industry when they walk in the door in their Deep Fork restaurant. It's not a judgment call anymore. They know what size sign they can get and how fast it can flash and how bright and all, without any question at all, because the standards have been set for that property on setback, proximity to residential. It's all there, and it tells them specifically that we've never had before what they can do. I just want to say, in all the work that's been done in the last year, exasperating and no fun kind of work, that we just not be in such a rush that we can't take a couple of weeks or a month. And I'd like to just have some application, Mayor, in a few outside of Ward 2, in a few other sensitive areas to see what is the application, and then is it the corridor approach that we move forward on and then just adopt the ordinance as proposed in the rest of the city? I don't know. I'm hearing for the first time, and we all are, the suggestion from Leslie Batchelor that perhaps there is a way to take a step with this ordinance without adopting it citywide initially. So
let me ask a question. These examples that you gave, today, could everything that you described today, could everything be put in?
No.
So this resolution is less restrictive than what we currently have in place?
This ordinance is less restrictive?
The one that we're considering, is it less restrictive or more restrictive than what we currently have in place?
It would be less restrictive.
So the scenarios that you described could not take place today?
No.
Okay.
Not to this extent. I mean, there's some places it could, but not to this
extent. I understand. Okay.
Yeah, just try to clarify that. The sizes of the signs could be the same, but the operational standards wouldn't be the same.
Yeah. You could put those signs, the very same signs we're talking about, in there. You just couldn't operate them the way we're.
They wouldn't be the level 3 signs.
So this is not more restrictive. This is not less restrictive. Those signs could all go in there anyway, except they couldn't be electronic. They couldn't be state-of-the-art signs, but they could all go in there. This doesn't change. In fact, it's more restrictive in terms of separation, setback. The only thing that it does, it permits state-of-the-art signs to go in. I mean, it doesn't add any more signs. It takes away signs and because of setback and separation requirements.
Okay. Yeah, Meg.
I guess if I could, just a couple of comments. And again, I really respect the work of the task force. This is not an easy thing, and we've been round and round with signs for a long time, and it is complicated. But as I read this and have tried to work through it, until I saw Sam's illustration on the Western Corridor, it was very hard for me to understand how it physically is applied and what could happen. And thinking about the Western Corridor, imagine if we had 6 or 7 of these LED signs in the middle of that Chesapeake Christmas display, and what that might have done visually for that area, I think, is pretty significant. So I also am extremely concerned, as Leslie Batchelor's comments were. I'm concerned about these new emerging commercial districts. I think we really need to take a hard look, and I appreciate the thought of being able to possibly distinguish some of these areas like the Plaza District, 23rd Street, some of these corridors. I would be supportive of deferring so that we could just take a look at some of the more sensitive areas in the city and perhaps not go forward with a blanket ordinance.
Pete?
I mean, I appreciate all the comments on how hard that we worked on this thing. I don't mind criticism. I've been married 25 years. I mean, I'm used to criticism. But I do think that, I mean, the people, the other people that served on the thing also put a lot of energy and time in this thing. I think this illustration is misleading in that it does not, because all those signs could go there anyway. I mean, I think that's I think if you had another one that said, could signs go in these locations, you'd have the same chart. They'd all go there. I think perhaps we can do something. We can do better. I suspect we take another year, we could do better, and then another year after that, we could do better than that. But at some point, I think it's time to just move forward and see where we are.
Yeah, I think to do nothing is a mistake, because this technology is coming. And one of the reasons we're running into issues is because we're one of the first cities that's actually dealing with it. And I think to wait is not going to help anyone. Yeah, Gary?
Well, and I'll just echo or reinforce what Pete was saying. And when we started out on this task force, all of this was driven because we did not have an ordinance addressing current technology. The flashing sign ordinance that people were getting to put up signs like Sonic was created for the little trailers that had the yellow lights around the edge, and they blinked. That was the flashing sign ordinance, and that's how long ago we're dealing with technology. The issue of the size of signs in corridors I would ask all of you to reflect on, are you concerned about the size of the signs, or are you concerned about the new technology being used on the signs? Because the size of the signs can be, as Pete said, can be there now. And in fact, we've lowered some of those. You could, in fact, have a company on the very street you're talking about, Sam, that has a current sign that's just a lit sign that could be restricted from putting that same size sign in should they want to do something differently. So are you concerned about the size of the signs on the frontage, or are you concerned about the new technology of EMD? I joke many times during the task force about how my level of concern was going up and down with a lot of this, because there was a voice out there coming from Planning Commission and other people that said we shouldn't have them, period. Do away with all of them. And you can't do that. You've got a bunch of businesses that have invested money in signs that were permitted and allowed. How are you going to say from this point forward we're not ever going to allow a sign again? Or we're going to change how you do signs? You've had businesses sitting here. Did you see the timetable that Russell put up? How long we've been holding businesses off trying to tell them what the new rules were. And there's a bunch of people out there waiting to put in signs, I would imagine. I imagine sign companies that will, hallelujah, when we finally adopt something at some point in time. But I would just caution you when you start getting into these corridors, or when you start trying to amend, or when you start trying to do something, that you piecemeal it around the city, because enforcement will be an absolute nightmare. An absolute nightmare. It's already going to be tough to enforce electronic message boards ordinances, period. As you saw, as Russell alluded to, when you talk about how long it can stay up, whether it can scroll, whether it can be animation, all of that is driven by enforcement, but yet it can be changed on a computer. I can get it, the people can get it on their signs and put it in the computer and change it, and 15 minutes later they can change it again. So every time you're wanting to enforce something on these signs, it's just going to be a nightmare. And if we start putting piecemeal, it's okay in this part of the city, but it's not okay in this part of the city, I think it's going to further increase that nightmare. If there's a sense on the council that you don't, if it's truly the electronic message boards and not the size of the sign, then let's just eliminate them. Let's just say you can't do them. And because at some point in time, you're going to have to start dealing with the fairness in the sign companies and the business community of, if I build a business on this street, I can do this, but if I go over here, I can't. In the same city, it's just going to be really hard. And it appears that there's going to be enough votes here to defer this longer and study it more and try to change it and so forth. But I'm telling you, these people out here, the business community and the sign companies, have been waiting a long time trying to get an answer, and we're going to defer again giving them an answer. And I would caution against that at some point in time. But if you're wanting to really restrict the electronic media as it is today, then that's what we ought to be talking about, not piecemealing the size of signs and piecemealing where they can go and piecemealing the size of them. Let's either deal with the real issue that's out there that is driving people's concern or not. And as Pete said earlier, we got here because of a number of issues that were laying out there, a number of times that they had to go in front of different boards. Did you go to the Traffic Commission? Did you go to Planning? And so forth. And part of the concern from the business community and the sign companies is that they were not getting fair and consistent treatment from those boards when they wanted to put up a sign. It seemed to be very arbitrary and very personal sometimes about where electronic signs were allowed. And part of the task force meetings in the very beginning dealt with, we got to find a way to make it fair and consistent to where they know what they can do and what they can't do at some point in time. So I would caution us to spend, if you need more time, let's do more time with it. Let's move on with it.
It's Sam and then Pete. Okay, one more.
I feel like I'm being persuaded by Gary with respect to the consistency and fairness of what we move forward with. Gary, my concern is very much the electronic message sign, the flashing signs, the continuous scroll, and the concern in using this application only on Western Avenue, the concern about the little Las Vegas strips that I think this application very, very definitely shows. And it was suggested again by Ms. Batchelor that you can't very well go back if you set the start at 200 square feet. But I would think you could. I know you can always, through gradation, after a year's time perhaps, try it out. And I'd like to, in the sense of fairness and consideration, in terms of in the timing that we're all impatient about, is perhaps look at something a little more closer initially across the board, but closer to the 50-foot maximum. One sign that Russell showed us was, I think, 75 feet. That's all that we have from, I guess, existing signs, and that might have been the Moore sign. But perhaps we look at something closer to that starting point, a 75-square-foot sign that would be, as we visualize the sonics across this city, are 25 square feet on an average. That's the average size of a sonic sign. Three times that would be this 75-foot sign that I think we saw on another location. That we start there, and if we can do that, and look at it for a year's time and see where that takes us so that we can get started with something. It's something fair, it's something consistent, something everybody understands, and it is a place to start. But, you know, when the sign representative stood up and said, we're a big league city, it's time to step up and put these signs, I say we're a big league city, and it's time that people are looking at us, that we set ourselves as a standard setter and that we do it right. Not that we just, let's do it because we're a big league city. It's doing it right. And I think we could do it in a graduated way with less size to start with and look at it if we can do that legally. I mean, run it for a year's time and let's see what our experience is.
Okay. Pete?
I think we're going to go ahead and defer it. I think the vote's here to do it, but I think before we do it, we ought to amend it to include the changes that we talked about on the 4, 5, or 6, or 3 signs that we talked about that came out of the Traffic Commission before. And I think Kenny's got language to do that. I think Gary asked him to prepare it. So,
Kenny, if you could read your proposed language that you showed me, please.
Yes. Excuse me.
Okay. Anybody else want to speak? Yeah, Larry.
Yeah. There are areas of the country where all signage is illegal. My daughter lived in Burlington, Vermont for a number of years, and that was their modus operandi. So there were no signage anywhere in town. I don't hear Oklahoma City being in that mode of operation right now. And so therefore, this particular ordinance, and as Brian has spoken about, as far as bringing something that the business community can live with, that attempts to have some degree of logic, but gives business operators an opportunity to invest and to advertise their businesses, I'm in favor of. I'll vote for, the only way I'll vote for a deferral is if the task force members want a deferral. Other than that, I think the task force has done their work. We have plugged a legitimate hole that has been given it to us, and I don't see where a deferral is going to do any good myself. So if Pete, if you want a deferral, I'll go for it. But short of that, I'd say vote and let's get on down the road.
All right. Well, we're looking for a motion.
Well, I don't want a deferral, but I'm going to move it. And I am because I think as a courtesy to other people on the council, if I had something that I felt this strongly about as Meg and Sam do today, I would appreciate the fact that my colleagues gave me a 2-week deferral. And the collegial atmosphere that we serve on in this council dictates to me that I move the deferral.
All right. We have a motion and a second. We're ready to vote on the 2-week deferral? All right. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. What do we expect to come back to us? Perhaps 2 resolutions to vote on, or perhaps amendments to this existing resolution? Where do you see this going?
Would the chair of this task force, the co-chairs, be open to 2 motions? I mean, 2 resolutions to come back? I'd like to see one as is, and I'd like to see one with a reduced square footage.
Yeah, I don't think that's a bad idea, that the council could have 2 different things to look at and make a decision, because I think there is sentiment here. We need to make a decision and move on. But I kind of like the idea of having 2 to consider when we come back.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
What if both of them pass?
What, Brian?
What if both of them pass?
We'll have Skip next week. We'll have 9.
Put an or in there? Okay, we'll put an or in there.
You could do that as just amendments to this ordinance. Just have amendments prepared to this ordinance that you could propose if you wanted to do it that way.
So vote the ordinance and then the amendments separately?
Yes, you'd vote on the proponent of the amendments would move the amendment, and then you'd vote on that. And then if it's adopted, this ordinance would be amended to incorporate that.
Okay. 2 weeks?
2 weeks. Mayor, could we have staff select, for application standpoint, 4 or 6 additional sensitive type, once again, just to see what does the application of the ordinance, what are the implications of it? So we see that. I want to just point again that a 25-foot standard sonic sign in this city that is here to stay. It's not trying to get rid of them. 3 times that size is quite an extensive sign to do everything we want to, I think we want to do. And I'd like to just see once again in a few other areas what the application of the 200-foot sign, square foot sign would do, and that the other resolution would address the 75-foot.
If I could just make a very quick comment. We currently have districts and areas in our community that have special requirements. We have design districts, we have historic districts. It would not be particularly complicated to make an amendment to this ordinance that would relate to existing specially treated districts. And that is kind of the direction that I was trying to go.
Okay. Brian?
Just a quick question. The specification of, say, a 100-square-foot sign, wherever you would get to that point, is that for one side of the sign? Does it specify that's 100 square foot on one side of the sign, and it allows 100 square foot on the other side?
Yes, each sign could be 100. If it's allowed 100, you could have 100 on each side. Okay. It's measured.
Okay. Ready to move on? We're on to item 8F. This deals with military leave and how it affects retirement. Okay, we have a motion and a second, and then we'll be voting on the emergency. Cast your votes on the item. Passed unanimously. Okay, we have a motion and a second on the emergency. Cast your votes. It passed unanimously. Item G deals with the dilapidated structures. This is a public hearing. Is there anyone here wishing to speak under any item listed under 8G? All right, sounds like we're good to go.
Move it.
We have a motion and a second. Cast your votes on 8G. Passed unanimously. On item 8H, this is a public hearing regarding unsecured structures. Is there anyone here wishing to speak under any item listed under 8H?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 8I is a right-of-way use permit for a special event, January 9th, the Thunder Integris Health Display.
Move it.
We have a motion? Second. Anyone here wishing to speak on this item? All right, cast your votes. Passed unanimously. And item J has to do with the taxi service issue that we dealt with several months ago. And again, we put together a committee, and Sam chaired that committee. Sam, you want to report back on this item?
Mayor, we have an appeal from A1 Taxi Service. It has been held until the taxi task force has done its work. In the past 6 months, and I see representatives from A1 here, I don't think it's necessary for them to speak, because in this time period that the task force has been looking at revisions to the ordinance, by the way, those revisions are completed. They'll be presented to the Traffic Commission this month and back to us, to the City Council, in February. So that work's completed and on track to come to us by February. In the 180-day period that they've been on probation, A1 Taxi Service, in the course of this study, there have been, as of yesterday, no complaints filed regarding A1's refusing of service to anyone. So from that standpoint, and the fact that the Taxi Committee's work has been completed, I would recommend that we approve the appeal of A1 Taxi this morning.
Okay. Any comments or questions that might be pertinent to what we're discussing or about to do? All right. We have a motion and a second. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously.
I want to say to appreciate the service of the A1 Taxi people in the last 6 months. Thank you very much.
All right. Item K is a workers' comp issue. I understand we do not need executive session.
That's correct.
Okay. All right, cast your votes on 8K. Passed unanimously. Item 8L, I understand we do need executive session?
Yes, sir.
All right, cast your votes on 8L. Move to executive session. Item 8M, I understand we do need executive session?
Yes, sir.
All right, cast your votes on 8M. Thus moved. Item 8N, I understand we do need executive session?
Yes, sir.
All right, cast your votes. Moves into executive session. Moves us down to 8O. These are claims recommended for denial. Is there anyone here wishing to speak under any item listed under claims recommended for denial? We have a couple of people that have signed up to speak, but is anyone that did not sign up? All right, well, let me get to these people first, and then we'll deal with you. Cecilia Holmes. If you two want to come up together, you can. I see Cecilia and John Holmes are both here to speak on the same issue.
Same issue.
Okay. On the same side of the issue, I assume?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, come on. All three of you can come up then at once if you'd like. We will need each of you that are going to speak to give us your name and address for the record.
I guess I've been elected as the spokesperson first. My wife is going to yield her 3 minutes to me. My name is John Holmes. I currently reside at 3601 Windsor Terrace, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. On October the 1st, 2009, on or about that time, we arrived to our house. We're leasing this home from Mr. McCarty. The main city line, hand that to the mayor, the main city line, water line in the front of the house broke, shot waves of to at least up to 50 feet in the air of water, took chunks of the ground at least that big, slammed it into the garage, broke windshields, flooded the house. Water inspector came out, Mr. Rick Gilbert from the city, says that it was the city line that broke because of the high pressure water that's going through there from Hefner Lake or whatever that is, that's close to Hefner Lake. Long story short is, my wife and I, clothes, cars, one of our cars, TVs, we don't have much to wear right now because of all of the stuff, damage that was done to our house from the water. Well, we feel like once the guy had told us that it was a city problem, that we don't have to worry about anything, turning our claims to the city. There was people that came in and took our clothing, took all our clothing. And when I say all of our clothing, I mean all of our clothing. Took all of our clothing and took them to a restoration company to get our clothing back together. TVs, well, 2 of the TVs were destroyed. Just a whole lot of things. But we didn't think none of it when he had told us that it was the city's fault. I didn't think anything of it. I feel like if I run a stop sign, the city makes me pay. If I tear up something that belongs to the city makes me pay for it. My mind was, same thing. If the city tears up something of mine, common sense would tell me that the city would pay. Well, we waited. We've been waiting. We're still waiting. We still have no clothes. We still don't have the TVs. We had to move out the house because it was inhabitable. And finally get a call from the city 3 months later, close to it roughly, and says, we're denying your claim. And I asked the question, common question, why? Because we didn't give the city notice to fix the water line break. If I'd known there was going to be a water line break, I would have took my stuff, moved it out the house, so it wouldn't destroy my stuff. There's no way, if I could have known that, we would have told you that. Which, to me, I'll be honest with you, I don't even understand why I'm here. To me, it should have been just that simple. But this has caused a lot of trouble for me and my family, in that still we don't have the clothing that we need to have. We've had to try to move right in the middle of not ready to move. We was at the hospital when we got the phone call that the house was being flooded. And I don't understand why we're here. I don't know why the claim would be denied. I understand what they're trying to say is because the code says that the city has to have a chance to fix it. To me, that's a catch-22. If we know it's going to break, we would tell you. That's all I have to say, and I yield to Mr. McCarthy.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I'm Richard McCarthy, 9913 Commonwealth Place, Oklahoma City, Ward 5. I guess my understanding is that there's some kind of laws and things that we have to give the water department notice when anything's going to break. Usually I think you have seepage or something like that. There's absolutely no warning, nothing. And the first time I knew about it, Reverend Holmes called me and said, the house is being flooded. And I don't know if you watch Channel 5 anymore, but they were out there. It was such a significant event. They had all the cameras out there because it blew the roof off. Thousands of gallons went through the house. Okay. But anyway, they said that we're supposed to it's impossible for us to do that. Unless I have psychic ability, I can't do that.
I understand. We're familiar with the law, and we don't always like it either, but let me get some legal advice here, see what our options are.
All right, the case law is cited in our memo. The case law in Oklahoma is that the city is not an insurer of its water mains, but if it fails to remedy a rupture after notice thereof and by its inaction permits continuance or of resultant damage to property, it's guilty of negligence. So the city has to have some notice either of the rupture and then we don't fix it within a reasonable period of time, or we have to have some prior notice that there's a problem with the line that could cause a rupture, and we've investigated from what city records and have not found any such
Well, I
evidence.
would like to add to that, those lines, I estimate, around 45 years old
Have no
or
idea.
more, because that's an old, the Greens is what we're talking about, it's an old subdivision. And they know the water pressure there is extremely high. The city knows that.
As a matter of fact, the statement was that they are aware. So my thing is, the warning would be that they are already aware that the water lines are the pressure is too high there. It's not like we're coming up with something that the city's not aware of. The city is already aware that the water pressure there is too high. It just so happened, bad luck, it broke the house that it broke in the front yard of the house.
You know, having to break it 30 degrees right at the house rather than 90 straight up. If it had been straight up, it would have been no big deal.
But it right at the house. And the truth of the matter is, if you would have seen the size of dirt, it was throwing up the lot. I'm glad nobody was at home. If you could have seen what it did to the house, I'm glad no one was there. This could be a totally different situation.
This just seems like an extraordinary event. Do you have anything to add to this that Kenny didn't add?
Amy Harrison, Municipal Counselor's Office. No, just that our department did not have any prior notice of any problem with that line.
Yeah, it just seems to me like these are extraordinary circumstances and beyond what we typically deal with here. I understand the state law and understand it's state law, it's not our law. And we have to abide by it, and sometimes we're restricted by state law over what we can pay. It's not a discretionary situation. Let me see if we can get into is there any discretionary opportunities here, Kenny?
Excuse me, we don't think that the council has any discretion based on what we know to approve it. However, of course, they have the right to get a private attorney, and for the amount of damages you're claiming, you can probably get a private attorney on this who will file a lawsuit and press your claim. So that would be my advice to them.
I see. When we're restricted by state law, they might have they have certainly have the legal opportunity to take us to court.
Yes, and right, they can. I would recommend that they get their own attorney on this.
Mr. Holmes, Mr. McCarthy, excuse me. This is one of the toughest things that we deal with up here. Is especially for me, I'm not an attorney, so trying to determine and trying to find the line between negligence and an accident. And Mr. Holmes, what you were talking about running a stop sign, that's negligence. I mean, you're negligent for breaking the law. What we're restricted by is if we have a city truck of some kind and that driver runs through somebody's yard and hits their car, that's negligence. On something like this, with the notice, what that is establishing is negligence. If we do not fix something that we're told we need to fix, then that would be negligence, and that's where we'd be liable, as best I understand it. In this particular case, because there's no way for us to know, just like there was no way for you to know that this was going to break, that's where we don't have the negligence, and the state law prohibits us from being able to pay that. I did have one question. Is this an area that is known for like excessive water breaks because of the pressure on the lines? Do we know?
It's not known for excessive water breaks. It is a high-pressure area in town. We do have several high-pressure areas in town. It's not excessive, it's high.
Is it high to a point that we need to maybe look at maybe reducing it so that things like this don't happen, or is that something that we cannot do?
That's almost impractical given the operation of the system.
Pat? Two questions, Your Honor. First of all, is there any suggestion that the city didn't respond promptly to this incident? Because that would establish negligence and give them a basis for continuing the claim.
That ran for 4 hours.
But there's a difference between, responding and getting it fixed. So my question is, was there any suggestion at all that we didn't respond promptly to this when we were notified of the leak?
Not based upon what we found. However, I'm not an expert on repairing water main breaks.
But I understand repairs may take longer, but did we make our response promptly and begin repairs in what should, a reasonable time?
I mean, I would think something this size, the main could have been shut off much quicker than 4 hours. I mean, just from a common sense point of view.
Counsel, I apologize. I don't have those facts about the timelines for when we were contacted and how long it took us to get out there. Normally,
a Code 1 break is responded to as quickly as possible. Someone is out there shutting down the main as soon as we can physically arrive at that location. Our staff is located at about 5th and Penn, so obviously there's a drive time between the greens and that location. We're happy to research that information.
I would like to know the actual response time to getting the shut off versus what the average response time is. Is it close or is it way out of whack?
Yeah, we'd be happy to do that. You want to defer it for 2 weeks?
I would like to defer it for at least 2 weeks until we get that resolved. And the second question I have before we vote on the referral is the comment about the high pressure that system is being operated under. Are we confident that the system is designed to operate under those pressures? I mean, are we exceeding the limits of what we should expect that facilities to operate under by operating under high pressure?
No, again, there are high-pressure parts of the system, low-power parts of the system, but it's well within.
When we have a system that is high pressure, we have acknowledged that in our design and installation reflects that high pressure.
The pipe is designed and installed well within the parameters of installation. However, when a break does occur in one of those high-pressure areas, it is more susceptible to more damage to occur.
The system as installed was designed to accommodate those high pressure.
Yes.
Okay.
I got a question about that. Since it's so old, was that designed at high pressure when this was put in?
Yes.
And I can answer that. The answer is that there is that's cast iron pipe out there. Cast iron pipe can last well over 45 years, and we have not had any significant types, or I'm not aware of any.
So it's borderline in age then?
What's that?
That pipe is right now, today, borderline in age?
No, not necessarily. Cast iron pipe, we have cast iron pipe that's been in the ground over 100 years in Oklahoma City without problem.
You said 45, that's what was going on.
Not to be the dead horse, and Brian understood what you just explained to me about the law. Not to be the dead horse, but my mind works a little crazy sometimes. So let me ask this question here. You're saying that if I have a piece of equipment that I totally own, and that piece of equipment breaks, I'm not aware of anything wrong with it, and the person that it breaks with is not aware of anything wrong with it, and that piece of equipment breaks and hurts that person, who's liable?
I'm not an attorney. I don't know.
Okay. So
we don't disagree that the law has some issues, but and that's really not what we're discussing today. We're trying to figure out a way to help you out.
And thank you, Mayor. And let me say this here. That's why, to be honest with you, I'm still trying to figure out why I'm not here. If you're here, if you're here to help or just say, well, we're going to do what's right about it, I understand that there are some laws in place you have to go by the law. But when a person that works for the city says, I City Line broke and tore up your stuff, why are we talking about it?
Well, I don't think we want to get into the legal issues today, but I can assure you we're acting in accordance with state law, and it restricts what we can do and how we can deal with situations like this, as sensitive as we might be to the individual situations that they come before us, and this is a perfect example. Larry, then Sam.
I'm assuming we're going to go for a 2-week deferral, Jim, on this, but during that time, is it possible to also find out at what pressure that line was under when the break occurred?
We can give you, I'm sure,
because
a pretty close ballpark.
Kenny, will this change it? If, in my simple mind, if the pressure was supposed to be 100 psi, and we were operating at 500 psi, then would we not be negligent?
Well, obviously, not obviously. 500 psi would.
I'm just don't quote the numbers. I
understand, but there are limits to what the pipe can handle pressure-wise, and we can tell you whether or not we were operating outside of those limits.
I think that's a piece of information I think we should have.
Okay. Sam? All right. Let us look into this. I think we're going to get a 2-week deferral on the item and research and see if there's a way that we can legally pay you at some level of claim. So what you have right now is our best intentions, but no promises.
Could I ask you one more thing, too? They received a report from the city we never got. The city water company, whatever. Rick?
The information that was supposed to be sent to our house.
You used that report in your memo to us. We never received a copy of it. report?
Right, we don't generally send out those
Not allowed to
reports.
look at
We'd give you a copy of the memo that we're proposing to City Council.
The water report would be an open record, so I'd just give him a copy. Yeah.
Okay,
thank
we'll get it to you.
I'd like to make a motion to defer B and C for 2 weeks, please.
Okay, and B and C are the same item, same issue? Okay, cast your votes on this is a deferred. Do we have to defer them separately? No. Okay, we'll defer them both, same vote. The item is deferred 2 weeks. All right, do we have a motion and a second on the other two items? Or at least the other item, because D has been deferred also. No, we don't. Okay, we have a motion on item O1A. Cast your votes, and that item is denied. Item 9 is claims recommended for approval. Is there anyone here wishing to speak on any of these items? All right, we have a motion and a second. Cast your votes. Those items have been approved. Items from council. Pat, you want to get us started? All right, Meg? Anything from council? Brian? Pete? Larry? Sam? Gary?
Well, just a quick attaboy to city staff, all the people that dealt with the storms, public safety response during the storms, including IMSA, Public Works. I mean, I don't know that you could ask for a better group of hardworking people than we had working during the Christmas Eve blizzard. I know I've received a number of people concerned about the inadequate road clearing on some of the snow routes, but I would just tell them that we couldn't afford to be prepared for a 14-inch blizzard. They wouldn't want us to try to keep that ready. So I think they did an excellent job with what they had, and my hat's off to all of the city staff that participated in that, and keeping the city going as best we could.
Okay. City manager reports.
You want to just follow up on Mr. Mars' comments. You know, it was a very, very difficult storm to manage. It was because it came in so quick, and as of that Thursday morning, there were still mixed reports as to how bad it was going to be. I just want to reassure that we had every piece of equipment we had was out on the streets operating 24 hours a day, and we called in contract help as quickly as we could to get them mobilized to assist us on this. We stayed on the snow routes. We executed the snow plan. However, it was very difficult to execute because of the number of stuck vehicles that were in the way. We couldn't get a clear path through there, nor could we do it particularly timely because our vehicles were oftentimes stuck in traffic, especially during that first 24 hours of the storm. It was a very, very difficult storm to try to manage.
Jim, in that regard, we talked earlier tonight about some kind of report that reflected all our efforts. Is that in still?
I won't promise it. It's in the works. Hopefully next Tuesday. I won't promise it until next Tuesday because it's not done yet, but we're working toward that.
Thank you.
And so that's the only comments I guess I have.
Okay. No one has signed up citizens to be heard. Assume that's still the case. We have executive session, and then we'll come back and do the Council Finance Committee. So we have executive session. We'll be back. All right, I'll be looking here for motions to strike item L and then item M, but in separate motions. Okay, cast your votes. Item L is struck. Now, how about item M? Okay, cast your votes to strike item M, and that item is struck also. And I guess now we're ready to adjourn. that
We're
right?
going to adjourn and
Okay.
convene.
We'll adjourn the City Council meeting. Now we'll convene as the City Council Finance Committee. Jim, where do you want to go from here?
I think we're ready to begin and begin the Finance Committee meeting. Our agenda really falls within 4 categories. We're going to do look at the current economic situation. We're going to look at the current revenue status. We'll look at mid-year budget reductions, and then we're going to look a little bit ahead to fiscal year 11. The current economic situation is complicated. Some are stating that the recession at the national level has ended. Unemployment remains high nationally and is expected to retreat slowly. In Oklahoma, the unemployment has been in the 5 to upper 5%. Last month it jumped up to a little over 6%, and that's not good, and it's particularly not good if you're unemployed, because obviously it affects you personally. But the fact of the matter is we're still well under unemployment trends across the nation. Oklahoma City's unemployment is the second lowest of any large metro area in the country. Again, we're about 6.5. Last year, we were about 4.2, or in October 08, we were 4.2. So it's gone up significantly, but again, not as much as other places in the country. Other things that affect the economy locally is the energy sector. We're still heavily driven by the energy sector. Natural gas prices have been low compared to what we've seen over the last couple of years. It was about $5.90 this morning was the price of natural gas, and that's good to keep it low if you're paying your monthly bill, although it's not good if we're trying to drive the local economy in Oklahoma City. Active oil and gas wells in Oklahoma they're down in 08. November we had 187 active wells. November of 09 we had 80 active wells. Russell Evans, who's the research economist at OSU, projects no significant recovery for Oklahoma until mid-2010. Although the price of crude oil, not natural gas, but crude oil, has been up. It was up at $81 a barrel this morning. Again, not as high as it was a year and a half ago, but there is some movement in that area. But with all the things that are going out there, unemployment, natural gas prices, what really affects Oklahoma City is one thing and one thing only, and that's sales tax collections. And sales tax collections is not good and has not been good now for several months. We're going to show some graphics on that in a couple of minutes. The state of Oklahoma reports that personal income tax collections were down 17% in November of 09. So there is a decline statewide in income tax collections. And although things are not good here in respect to sales tax collections, although we have other positives going on, sales tax collections are still down. When you compare us to other cities, I would rather be in Oklahoma City than in any other city in the country. And I'm going to compare some other cities, and we chose not to compare cities like Detroit and Atlanta and some on the West Coast that are seeing some very significant. We tried to compare with cities that are more in the Midwest that are more peer cities for us. Starting with Tulsa. Tulsa is about $11 million below budget. They've cut more than 100 positions, no pay increases for employees, 8 furlough days. They've grounded their police helicopter, canceled police and fire recruiting classes, and they're in a second year of mid-round cuts, up to 4.4% this time around. Phoenix, which we always consider to be a very vibrant and going economy, they had to cut $300 million from their budget. They've lost 1,500 jobs over the last two years, 1,500 jobs within the city organization. Yeah. Dallas, so it's a larger organization than we have, Councilman Bowen, still cuts. Dallas is facing a $190 million deficit. They've eliminated 1,165 full-time employees. They have mandatory employee furloughs. They've reduced police field patrol, tactical operations, and recruitment. Fort Worth has eliminated 147 positions, no pay increases for employees. They've had 8 furlough days. They've eliminated their take-home car program. They've reduced hours at their animal shelter, and they've closed a library. And Denver is proposing cutting $120 million, 176 layoffs, the elimination of 600 vacant positions, no pay increases again, 5 furlough days, closing recreation centers, and reduced hours of operations for libraries. And so that's what's going on with some of our peer cities. And quite frankly, those are the good cities. We chose not to compare ourselves with some of the larger cities that are having more significant issues. When we take a look at our current year revenue status, Craig's going to walk us through that. Craig Freeman, our budget director.
All right, thank you. As we look at the current revenue status, we've talked to you about this different times as we looked at our sales tax reports and as we've talked about going to the mid-year reductions. Our current year status right now with revenues, we're about $17.5 million below target. You can see there's several areas that we're down. Some of those areas, like for instance in licenses, permits, and fees, we had actually projected a decline, but it's even lower than the decline that was projected. The big story is sales and use tax at about $15 million below target for the year. In our 6 months through the year, we're about 11% or 11.5% below what we had in collections last fiscal year. And you can look back, 30 years and not see a worse decline. Even during the oil bust, now there were several years that were small declines. I think the worst year was about a 4.5% decline. We're currently in this fiscal year at about an 11.5% decline. And so it's very significant. It's much worse than what anyone anticipated. You can see here on the sales tax, with the December check, that was our 10th consecutive month of decline, and it was our worst month of decline. The December sales tax check, I think when we look back over December of 2009, calendar year 2009, the actual sales tax collections were comparable to calendar year 2006. So we've backed up significantly in the level of sales tax collections, and as you know, sales tax being our largest operating revenue, has a significant impact then and is going to result in effects on services. As we've been analyzing and reviewing this on our sales tax, what's really come to light for us, and that is the biggest concern and helps us to see that not only looking at the mid-year adjustments, but also going into next fiscal year, we're going to have to make some tough decisions. There are going to have to be some difficult decisions made about the service levels that are provided, how we provide our services, and how we fund those services. FY10, we've done a projection on that with continuing decline with some improvement as we get into the latter part of the year, but what I call improvement now is less decline. We're still expecting decline, about a 5% decline on average through the end of the fiscal year. So if you take that projection that we've got at around $166 million for FY10, projection of slight growth in FY11, we're still working on these numbers now and working with Oklahoma State University, with their economists and helping us provide some projections. But if we had a slight increase next year, going out from FY11, what you see here is on the bottom line going out, we show 3% growth, if we average 3% growth. The middle line is 4, the top line is 5. Our long-term average growth on sales tax is about 4%. The line going across the middle at about $186 million is what we had originally budgeted for this year, how we had built our budget assuming this level of sales tax collection. So when you project this out, if we get back to normal growth levels, at best we're 3 years out before we see the same level that we'd actually projected for this year. And that tells you we're going to have to begin making decisions that are long-term decisions, even reducing the cost in how we provide our services, but also in impacting services and reducing services. And so it's going to be a longer-term path for us to get back to where we were for this year. And so it's going to take some time just to see that recovery. And as we've looked back at other cities, and we've talked with Tulsa, who actually suffered worse than we did during the 01-02 time frame with the recession during that period, and it took them about 4 years to get back to the level that they had in the previous year before the recession. And so it's not uncommon to see that. It's something we've got to prepare ourselves for and be expecting. Looking at our mid-year reductions, we've talked to you before about some adjustments that we're able to make, the way that we plan the budget, the way that you all work and approve the budget.
allows us some flexibility within the budget. However, it's not going to be enough to be able to absorb all of the reductions that we need to cover right now to cover that gap in the shortfall in revenues. We do have the hiring freeze in place. It's been in place since March of last year. We're continuing that hiring freeze. There are some positions that get approved to fill based on emergency needs, but the hiring freeze is in place and will continue, and it's created some vacancies that gives us some flexibility to be able to make some reductions without having to have significant layoffs. Deferring capital expenditures out of the general fund in this year, we're looking to save $4 million in that area. We're trying to hold back on our contingency expenditures out of the general fund with the recent snow event that we had. We're going to have to use some contingency, but we're still working to hold back and setting a goal to save $4 million in our contingency this year. The IMSA reserve, that with the ambulance membership program, the reserves that were set aside, we'll be able to use those to help out with some of our costs. Mr. Couch put a travel freeze in place. Not a huge amount of savings, but certainly in principle an important step for us to take. All of the departments were asked to propose a 2% reduction as we first started this, and actually the sales tax revenues have continued to decline further since we started looking at the mid-year reductions. Some departments were able to make their reductions by eliminating service contracts, or by reducing their supplies. And so they were able to achieve their savings, or at least a portion of their savings, without having to eliminate a lot of positions. But that's something that we can just do so much of. And so we are able to accomplish some of that in this midterm. It results right now in 37 non-uniform positions being eliminated. I think it's important when we look at, we have a little over 4,400 positions in the city. When you eliminate 37 positions out of those positions, there will be impact. But it's marginal impact right now. Now, on individuals and in individual areas, there may be more impact. It's going to result in the remaining employees having to assume more responsibility. We have, I don't know exactly the number of vacant positions, but we have, I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 160 vacant positions in addition to eliminating 37 positions. And so we are running on a shorter staff right now. So as time goes on and we're making more of those permanent adjustments going into next fiscal year, there definitely will be some effect on services, and it's going to put more burden and more responsibility on the remaining employees. We're going to look through some of the reductions that are made, and what I've tried to do here is highlight where we've eliminated positions. And just go through these quickly. We did provide a summary of the adjustments with your handouts. There's two additional handouts that are there. We have the presentation, then there's a summary of the position reductions that are being proposed, and there's another one on public safety that we'll talk about in just a minute. Just to review these quickly, in the city manager's office, there's a position being eliminated in the public information and marketing office, which will likely affect some of the original programming that can be done for Channel 20. The Development Services Department, our new department that was formed for this fiscal year with a reorganization combining services in several different departments. There are 5 permanent positions that are eliminated, 2 overage positions. There were actually 3 overage positions that were carried into this fiscal year that were not permanent positions, but they're going to be carried this fiscal year to help us as we transition into the new department with the business license program. 2 of those positions we're going to eliminate to try to get some of the savings now. We have 5 permanent positions. 3 of those are in animal welfare. 2 of those will be on the front counter. A primary service impact will be on the front counter. It will affect reclaims and intake and adoption services and just the timeliness of those services. Obviously, the bigger challenge will be during peak periods when we have more customers that are in there. The department's working to rearrange some schedules to try to cover that the best that they can, but there will be some impact on services there. There's also an animal welfare officer, eliminates 1 animal welfare officer in the field. This is a vacant position that was held vacant as a result of the hiring freeze. The high priority, the emergency calls will still be the high priority in animal welfare, but there may be some slower response as a result on lower priority calls. In code enforcement, we also have 1 vacant position that's being eliminated. Again, it was a vacant position as a result of the hiring freeze, and many of the positions that we're eliminating were vacant, and we were able to make those adjustments, and a lot of times the departments made those decisions because that's where they had vacancies. And so they're realigning as we're working through the hiring freeze to try to address their service needs where they can. Looking at the finance department, there are 3 positions that are eliminated. These are all support positions in accounts payable, in payroll, and then in our city treasurer's office. They will affect some of the timeliness of services that are provided, but we'll still be able to meet the deadlines and requirements that we have in those areas. In the fire department, there are 7 positions that are proposed. Now, these are only civilian positions that we're talking about at this point. What's important to see here is that there's only 31 civilian positions in the entire fire department. They're eliminating 7 of those positions. The result of this is going to be that other employees have to take on more responsibility. It may be uniform employees or existing civilian employees that have to take on more responsibility, but the department's intent right now is not to be pulling officers or firefighters off of the rigs, off the front line, to be able to help with these services. But there will be some uniform positions that are in administrative or management roles that will be taking on more responsibility. The likely service impacts are potential for decrease in the percent of time that front line of equipment is available because of a reduction in the maintenance shop. Also, they have a reduction in 1 staff member that will affect the repair of tools and small equipment. So there's some impact there. Management administrative support positions affects the timeliness of processing payroll and purchase transactions, and also responses to citizen inquiries and media inquiries. And so there's effect that we'll see there. General Services Department, there is 1 position that's eliminated in fleet management, and that had to do with their fuel purchasing and the internal billing program that we have, and so other management employees will be assuming those responsibilities. In the Municipal Counselor's Office, they're eliminating 3 positions. 2 of these are administrative and clerical support positions that support the attorneys and help them in their work. 1 is actually an assistant municipal counselor position, and there's some potential for delays in being able to respond to inquiries from staff with legal questions, and potentially also with supporting some boards and commissions. They may have difficulties at times being able to attend some of the meetings that they're normally scheduled for, but their goal will be able to try to be able to have one there at all at the meetings, but there is some potential for impact there. In municipal courts, this is one of the areas that they're actually seeing a reduction in service on the front end. Right now what they have is their hours on their front desk, hours of operation are 7 a.m. to midnight. They're going to trim that back to 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. It still allows some hours where people can come in and do business with the court after work hours, but they're not going to be open until midnight any longer, and that allows them to reduce some positions, but actually has a direct impact on the level of service that's provided. They also have a position that's eliminated in the activity they do in the marshal's office with hand-carrying subpoenas to witnesses that need to appear in municipal court, and they're going to do those by mail. The state laws allows us to do those by mail, and so we're going to work to do that by mail. And so those are the effects in the municipal court. I think there's also in the there's 1 probation officer position that's also eliminated that will reduce the amount of time that probation officers have to spend with those that they're working with on probation. In Parks and Recreation, the eliminations that they have here, one of the more significant areas will be in their mowing and litter pickup. They're going to extend the intervals for those mowing and litter pickups, and actually their goal will still be to hit their 3-week interval on medians and rights-of-way. However, during the rainy season or peak periods, there may be times when they have to extend that, and in some of the rural areas that are less traveled, they may have more extended mowing intervals there. And so we'll see some effect there. That right now their plan is not to affect any of the parks. That will be their goal, so that the parks will still be on the 3-week mowing schedule. But any of these things that we're talking about, as we start looking to FY11 and the budget there, I think realistically we have to expect that there's going to be more impact that we'll see in these areas. Some administrative duties will be absorbed by remaining staff, with a couple of eliminated positions in administration. The Hathaway Recreation Center is a part-time center that is at 3720 South Lindsay. It's a part-time recreation center. There's a couple of other opportunities, one with the Police Athletic League, and then the Schilling Center that's being renovated right now that's going to open up again in March, that are other opportunities that are there. And when the department looks at having to close a recreation center, they try to evaluate the actual activity and participation at the center, as well as other centers that are available to take the place of that center. In the personnel department, There's one position that's being eliminated from, it's one of their management positions being eliminated from employment and classification. This is a very small staff that serves a large organization, and so this has direct impact on their employment services and then being able to maintain the classification system. And so it'll result in some delays and put more stress on the existing staff. In the Public Works Department, there are 3 positions, all relating to engineering services. 2 of them have been vacant for an extended period. Actually, one position was originally added to support the sports facilities program as the construction. The department had already worked to be able to have another staff member to be able to take that responsibility, so they didn't ever have to fill that, and have held that vacant and are now going to be able to eliminate that without having an effect on services. But the reality is, as we make these reductions, and particularly as we go into next year and look at additional reductions, it could have some effect on the engineering program. We are moving. We had some micro-resurfacing materials that we purchased through the general fund. We're going to move about $330,000 of that to be purchased from the general obligation bond program. So we'll still be able to get those materials and continue the program at the same level, but we can't do a lot more of that because the general obligation bond program is limited in how much of those materials it can absorb and still get the work done, the work that's planned completed. In total, we have 37 positions that are eliminated. On the back of that first summary of the department changes, on the back page, there's a listing of every department, what their staffing levels were last year, what they're budgeted for this year, and the changes. This is just a summary of the specific changes that are proposed within individual departments in the midterm.
Before we get off personnel cuts, may I ask a question? Of the 37 positions that were eliminated, how many of those were vacant positions?
The majority, almost all of them were vacant positions. A couple of people were moved and given other opportunities.
Okay, but as a result of this elimination of 37 positions, we had no layoffs.
We had one layoff.
One layoff.
Which department did that come from?
This is the municipal counselor's office.
Well, I would just like to see in the future, when we're dealing with cuts, that the people in those departments have the option of saying, you know what, I can do without 5% of my salary to save one of my fellow employees. I mean, I think that should at least be their option to do that. And so I'd like to see that in the future.
We're going to talk a little bit about the things that we're looking at in FY11, and obviously if we're looking at the level of cuts that we're going to talk about, that certainly is one of the things we have to consider is the cost of the existing employees right now, and not just assuming that we have to cut positions on every one of those. So that's certainly something that we're going to consider.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead. Well, question. Yesterday when I talked to you, Jim, you said no layoff of personnel. Now I'm hearing one.
I was wrong yesterday. I was advised later that morning.
Okay, so we have one person.
That's correct.
Thank you, sir.
Craig, could we in a follow-up just see with regards to reductions, in addition to the 37, the other reductions that had taken place due to hiring freeze, as you mentioned, you didn't have the exact number, but something over 100 have been vacated due to the freeze. Could we just see from department standpoint where that...
So you want a list similar to this that shows like maybe budgeted positions and then how many are
Yes.
currently vacant? Okay, we can get that.
Thank you.
Sure. This brings us to the issue of the uniform positions. As we've discussed, in order to achieve the 2% reduction of the savings that we needed in the mid-year, we asked all the departments to look at their staffing, to look at their services, and to come back with proposals. The police and fire department actually had originally proposed, they looked in areas in contracts and in civilian positions, as we talked about in the fire department, where they could come up with savings within their budget without having to affect uniform positions. They still both, with their 2% reduction, proposed 76 positions. There was 36 positions in the police department and 40 positions in the fire department. Now, the second handout that we gave, there's a second handout that's a supplemental that shows what was originally proposed from the police department and the fire department. We're not currently recommending that we go forward with those in an effort to try to preserve those positions and preserve those public safety services. It's something you can't guarantee won't be it's something we have to consider in the future. But right now, what we're proposing is that we don't make those reductions, but we wanted you to be aware of what had been proposed as the departments were trying to take a look at their services and do all that they could to preserve those frontline services. The police, yes, sir.
So I'm clear and the watching public is clear, what you're getting ready to cover now and for police and fire and what is in this document under police and fire was what was proposed to meet those reductions, but is not being
recommended.
But that's not being put forward,
yes, sir,
to finish out this year.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
So all of the stuff you're getting ready to go through on the slides didn't happen.
Right, and we aren't going to go through the details of what was proposed. We provided that in a handout because of the fact that we're not going through that.
Councilman Mars brings up a great point. We need to be very, very clear on this, is that all departments were asked for a 2% cut. And so we got those, and we took a number of those recommendations that came down the line. We did take some cuts in non-uniform personnel from police and fire. They did, to achieve their 2%, recommend cuts that were up to 76 personnel. We're not recommending that we take any uniform cuts in police and fire, and Craig's going to talk about how we're going to backfill that. So we are not recommending at this time that there be any cuts in police and fire, and actually we're recommending that we add some in that area. So we'll get into that in more detail. But just that's because that's a very key issue that's out there.
May I just be really clear, Craig? These positions that we're talking about are positions that are currently not filled. Is that
in police and fire?
In police and fire.
No.
They are presently filled positions.
If we would have had to cut those,
if we would have taken the cuts, we would have had to have dealt with that issue. However, we're not proposing that we take those cuts. But we thought it was good for council to see that if we did take a 2% cut in police and fire, what that would mean.
so there are some reductions in costs in the budget in the police department and fire department, but they are not uniform positions. So civilian positions and some supplies in the fire department, and then 2 contract reductions in the police department. And those are summarized in that first document that we gave you. There has been discussion also of being able to enhance, not just preserve the current level, but enhance public safety positions, or the public safety services, in adding police and fire positions. Given the current economic situation, our current revenue situation, it's just not realistic to try to do that within our current budget, within existing resources. Although it is not a long-term solution, we are proposing that we look towards the MAPS 3 use tax to be able to help us maintain current levels and then also consider adding some positions. I think there's discussion about 10 additional firefighters and 20 additional police officers. We aren't presuming this. We're just saying if that is the direction that we went, we could use MAPS 3 use tax on a temporary term to be able to fill those positions and to start a recruit class. We actually, the MAPS 3 use tax will be in conjunction with the MAPS 3 sales tax. It'll take effect on April the 1st. But because the delays from when the vendor collects the tax, remits it to the tax commission, and then we receive our check, it'll be May before we get our first use tax check relating to MAPS 3. And so if we put into place a recruit class of 10 additional firefighters, 20 additional police officers on May 15th, there would be about $250,000 additional cost in this fiscal year that could be funded from the use tax. And so we just wanted to put that before you to see, how we could fund that. Again, we'll look at talking about some other alternatives that we have.
Can we go back to one slide that I think we went over pretty quick? I want to make sure it's very clear. That's the second bullet on the previous slide. And I just want to make sure what we're recommending here is that to get us where we need to be, we needed cuts across the board. Not taking uniform cuts in police and fire still leaves a gap for us to fill. What we're proposing is that the MAPS 3 use tax help fill that gap. And so if there wasn't a MAPS 3, there wouldn't be those revenues available. And so that's how we're able to achieve, without taking significant cuts elsewhere, is to use that MAPS 3 use tax to backfill that gap. That's also what we're proposing.
You said help fill?
Yes.
Yes.
So if we utilize the use tax, we still don't have enough money?
Well, it depends if you go strictly for the year. Money is fungible, and it goes across fiscal. It'll be a combination of using the use tax that's taken in this year, the use tax taken in subsequent years, and fund balance. to achieve that.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. That was an important point for us to make. Let's see here. So basically, with what we've proposed so far, the mid-year reductions with the hiring freeze combined, we believe we'll get about $4 million in savings. We already talked about the other adjustments we're making with capital and contingency and the IMSA reserves. The use of the MAPS 3 use tax to help preserve uniform positions will also help to fill that gap. And then we'll have to use fund balance or our reserves to help cover the remainder of the gap. And we do anticipate that in times that we have a downturn, and especially such a significant downturn, that we will have to use some reserves. It's been good that we've been able to, we actually started this fiscal year a little bit above the policy, a little bit above the 10%, 6 to 10% policy for reserves within the general fund, and so we have some flexibility to be able to do that. We're anticipating right now with what we're proposing that we'll use about $12 to $15 million of reserves in this fiscal year.
And so let's be clear on where we're at on this. We've got a $17 million shortfall at this point in time. We don't know how much worse it's going to get, but we do know there's going to be something beyond that. We're looking at the things we've listed earlier, of the mid-year budget cuts, of using the capital, of using the contingency. We're using some MAPS 3 use tax, and we're using some fund balance to fill that gap at this point in time. Presently, going into this fiscal year, we had a little over 10% on fund balance. Just because it works out. Generally, when we have a little over 10%, we come back and say, you know, we've done things like build sprayed grounds and done some resurfacing or traffic lights in the past. We didn't do that this year. We held that, and we were over 10% going into the year. With the fund balance use drop down, we're not going to be, we don't know exactly where it's going to be because there's so many unknowns at this point in time. Probably somewhere around 8% is where we're going to be, which will leave us a couple percent going into next year if things don't improve. So we're not going too far down the line. So we are using fund balance, a couple 3%, not knowing exactly where we are at this point in time, and again, we'll still have some left over. So what we're recommending is that we use the MAPS 3 use tax to backfill so we don't have to eliminate any uniform positions this year. And then we're also recommending to go forward and hire an additional 30 public safety officers, 20 in police, and 10 in fire.
What's the basis for 20 police officers and 10 firefighters?
Those were offers made to the unions back in November.
That were rejected.
That were rejected.
Okay. What was the basis for selecting 20 officers? We had a study, was it the Manning study for the police department?
Yeah, and it was a step toward achieving some additional manpower.
And did we? No.
I'm not real sure where this is an appropriate question, so I'm just going to throw it in here. I would like to know how the increase in sales tax from the county is going to negatively impact all these assumptions. Because prior to MAPS 3, the county jail was going to have to be remodeled, and the only two ways to do it are sales tax or property taxes. The citizens, I doubt very seriously, are going to do property tax, so I'm going to give it a fair opportunity that it's going to be a sales tax, which would raise the sales tax rate in Oklahoma City and Oklahoma County to 9.375. When that happens, there has to be it would seem to me that there would be a negative impact on sales tax revenue, which would throw all of these projections off.
Yeah, I don't.
So I would like to have somebody, probably not the same person who helped get us into this position, but an economist look at that and tell us what that is going to do to all of these.
Yeah, I haven't heard any county sales tax discussions that would be a full penny. I think there's a fraction that's been discussed somewhere between a quarter and a half, and I don't think the property taxes are totally off the table at this point in time. Yes, there is a need at the jail to do something over there. I don't think it's defined what it is. That being said, we'd be happy to take a look at, have an economist take a look at what an increased sales tax be below our present level, or above our present level, and how that could have a negative impact on the macro side of things.
Carrying forward, you said 2, perhaps 3% of our fund balance, carrying that forward?
Well, to be very clear, our policy says we're to maintain 6 to 10%, and we'll be in somewhere above or below 8% as we finish out this year.
As we finish out this year. What would that additional 2% represent
Dollar-wise, we're about $7 million.
We did want to take a quick look at FY11 and kind of the impact with the use tax, as well as some of our projections and what we're anticipating, to give you an idea. We do have the council workshop scheduled for January the 26th, where we're going to go into more detail about the budget and the plans going forward and have some more interaction on that. We wanted to give you an idea of what we're looking at right now. The current revenue estimate is $321 million. The expenditure estimate, if we just took the current year staffing where we are right now with the mid-year adjustments and increase that with some of the cost increases that are expected right now, it would be about $347 million, a little bit below where we started this year. There are a couple of adjustments that we've made, and we'll talk about those on the next slide. But basically, this leaves us with about a $26 million shortfall that we need to cover next fiscal year in order to be able to balance our budget. This is something that, like Jim said before, that a lot of cities throughout the nation have been experiencing, even to greater degrees than what we're seeing right now. But this is certainly an effect of the national recession, of the price of oil and gas on our economy and how it's affecting our sales tax. And so for us, we're starting to see the impacts of this more significantly now, and as you've seen with our sales tax, and it's going to result in adjustments that we have to make next fiscal year. One of the things that we're looking at right now in our assumptions.
Yeah, and let's be clear as we go before we go any further. These aren't any decisions that have been made. These are things we're looking at. All these decisions that we're talking about in the future will be council decisions and voted upon by this council. But these are some things that we as a staff are going to be looking at and evaluating and potentially proposing.
Let me ask you a question. Are these figures affected by adding an additional 30 public safety employees now?
Yes.
I don't understand why we're going to do that then. I mean, if we raise the amount of money that we're going to have to cut by adding new employees now, it seems to me, and then are we going to exempt those same groups from cuts again, and then we're going to cut deeper then into
So Jim, when we use the use tax for the buffer and to create the new positions that we're talking about, when does the use tax money run out, and when does the general fund take on those positions? Really, I think that's the discussion we're having. We could have the use tax continue to pay them, but at some point, we know that that's fundamentally not sound finances.
It just seems to me, though, that if we add employees, and wherever we pay it from, whatever source the fund is, we add 30 people, then when we look forward to next fiscal year, and we know that next fiscal year is going to take we're going to have a 12% across-the-board cut, we have escalated the amount of the cut we're going to have to take by adding new people to have to cut from.
You are correct.
And if we say, well, the public safety is exempt from all this, that means you're going to have to cut guys that are out there fixing that water break that we saw today, and the roads that are just, this storm has just ruined practically. I mean, in the rural areas, the roads are just gone almost. I think the idea of, if we've already gone past the idea of adding 30 public safety people, I'd like to go back there, and I'd like to have a discussion about whether that makes any economic sense to do that or not.
I think that's
I think that's the discussion we are going to have going forward as far as looking at the 2011 budget.
I mean, it's not that we don't.
We also keep in mind we have not negotiated our labor contracts going forward.
You know, we'd all like to have more police officers, and we'd all like to have more firefighters, and we'd all like to have, but to reward one area over all the other functions of the city, and then cause that to have to make a more sizable cut than in next fiscal year, just seems to me unwise. Financially, fiscally, it's unwise, and I'm not sure it's fair. And when you look at what all
if we didn't spend that use tax money on additional public safety officers, we wouldn't have to cut animal welfare officers, zoning officers, and we could use that use tax money in other areas to get through this period. But by committing to hire additional officers, we've eliminated that.
Or you could save money in the fund balance. You could have a higher fund balance going in, which which would be, could then fund some of this 12% that we're talking about next year, because you wouldn't have as high a number that you had to reach, and you have more money to reach it with, and you'd have the use tax free to do that. I mean, the commitments that we talked about back 3 or 4 months ago were, in my view, were a couple of things. We weren't as deep in as we are now. It's like, this is kind of like, well, I'm not going to use that to illustrate it. Anyway, it gets worse. It gets worse. And so we're now 3 or 4 months into it worse than it was before. And now we're looking at longer periods before we get out of it as we were before. And I just think that's not a good idea. I mean, I personally, as much as I'd like to add a rural road paving program. I invite you all out to my house and see what's left of the road in front of my house, you'd probably join me. But I don't think that's good financial management to add employees anywhere at a time when we are projecting further deficits. I think we're all going to have to tighten our belts and figure out how to get through this without. And I just think that's a bad idea.
The annual cost for those 30 additional officers is slightly under $3 million.
And if we left that $3 million, that's about what we're talking about taking out of the fund balance. And if we left that money, we wouldn't have to make 12% cuts next year if all these projections come out.
Well, keep in mind, though, Pete, the use tax is still an available option to us, and we have not negotiated our union contracts for next fiscal year. Both of those are discretionary, if not negotiable, factors to consider in your discussion.
Yeah.
But we're burying the lead here because we're doing what we said we're going to do. And what we said during the campaign is something we need to follow through on.
Well, I don't agree with that. I respectfully disagree with that. We offered to do that in an effort to resolve a problem. They rejected that offer. That's like having a dysfunctional family and your child says, I want a car, and they come home and go crazy, and then you buy them the car. I mean, that isn't how it works. That's not how life works. That's not how finance works. I mean, I personally don't feel like I've made a commitment as a council member to do that, and I certainly don't think I made a commitment to do that to the extent it's going to impact next fiscal year's budget for all these folks sitting out there and all the other 3,000 people that are not sitting out there.
Well, you don't know that it will.
Well,
Larry?
Well, it'll be worse probably. If things don't get better soon, it's going to be worse than that.
Well, just very briefly, without getting too far down the road, obviously we have a finite amount of money that we have to spend, and we can only spend that amount of money. And we need to prioritize how we spend that money. And for me, the priority has to go to public safety, and I think the results that we've had in the past have shown that public safety needs more uniformed officers out in the street doing the public service work that they're called to do. And so I don't see it as a reward. I see it as a coming up to what we need to do in order to provide the level of service that our citizens expect based on their priorities that they've espoused in the past.
Yeah, Brian?
Well, I'll just throw my 2 cents in here. The offer was made to public safety to get their endorsement of MAPS 3. They rejected that. But the campaign at that point continued to be that there was going to be additional officers and firefighters. So I would have to agree with the mayor that the campaign was run that there will be additional police officers and firefighters. And at that point, when that statement is made to the public, and as close as it was, there's probably people who made their vote based on that. At that point, all that other stuff goes out the window about what happened before. That's the offer that was made to the public, that if they passed it, that's what we would do. And so, to me, there is no choice, because if we don't do that, then we're going back on the promise that was made during the campaign.
The council never made that promise, though.
I didn't make
the campaign made the promise. Let the campaign pay for it.
That's right. That wasn't the deal either. That wasn't the deal. The offer was made not to about opposition to MAPS. It was to settle this goofy thing we've got going on with the arbitration with our last year's contract. That was all part of one deal. They rejected all that.
Well, all of that doesn't make a difference. What makes a difference is the promise, whether it was this council or whether
I didn't make
it.
it. I'm not bad. You're not going to get on my conscience about it because I didn't make it.
Well,
I wasn't in favor of it, and I'm not in favor of it now.
What the voters heard
Neither was Pat.
What the voters heard was
So it's
that if they voted yes, that they would get 30 additional uniformed people. And if they don't
Right,
do this, then
you're not one to be telling me what the voters thought. I mean, you were on the wrong side of that deal in the first place.
not based on the graph that we got back from the boards, but
I just don't want to go beyond this. I mean, we're going to do what we're going to do, and we're going to do it in a collegial way. At the end of the day, we're going to do it. But, but I think it's wrong. I think it's wrong to punish the rest of the 3,000 people that work for Oklahoma City and give that kind of deference. I just think it's wrong.
Well, I still think that's discretionary when you consider the use taxes available and the fact that the union contract's about negotiated for it. So you're jumping to conclusions there.
I'm not saying it's illegal.
Here's what I think fundamentally what we have to consider is listening to what they've said, and I'm generalizing here. We've got 2006 revenue and 2009 salaries. And our expenses are salary driven. And so if our revenue is not at 2009 levels, then our salaries can't be at 2009 levels, or the budget's not going to meet. Pretty simple in that respect. Now, the use tax is kind of an X factor that we can toss in there and certainly use it now under these extreme emergency circumstances, which I feel like we're in from a revenue standpoint. But going forward, we're going to have some decisions going ahead, and our unions are going to have to work with us. Because as we heard for the last few months, staffing is very, very important to them as it is to the citizens and as it is to this council. I don't think we're going to reach any conclusions today. I think this has been a worthwhile discussion. But we probably ought to go ahead with the budget presentation as the budget committee. Yeah.
I think the commitment, however people are feeling the commitment was made to use tax to add additional police officers and firefighters, without debating that, it never was said that it is going to start May the 1st or April the 1st. And in light of the conditions, we're still going to consider the commitment, but it may not have to be this May 1st. We've got to get through this next 6 months.
Well, I don't think we should put it off very long. I mean,
I think that option is there without.
Okay, I think it would contradict what I and / we said during the campaign. Are we going to get back to the budget meeting? Okay.
Going forward, these are some things, again, that we're looking at, not necessarily that we will be doing, and a lot of these we cannot unilaterally do. So we just want to lay that out there as we go forward. The first thing that we're not proposing at this point in time is pay plan increases. We didn't do that this year, and I know that's tough, but that's some of the things we've got to take a look at. A lot of these things as we go forward are tough. Next item is reducing capital and contingency budgets. Eliminate the EMSA support reserve. Reduce COPTA support due to additional grant revenues. And that's an area right now where we do have some opportunities for additional monies that are coming in. And we may be able to do that without having significant impact on the COPTA operation. But we're still looking at this point in time for departments to take a 12% budget cut. Now, and that's across the board. Now, that doesn't mean we're all going to take 12% budget cuts, but just like we all didn't take 2% budget cuts this year, we don't always take all the budget cuts that are out there, but we're going to have some things on the table for us to take a look at, and so we can identify what cuts there are going to be and how deep they're going to be across the board. There's going to be some difficult choices as we go forward this budget year. Other things that we think are worth looking at are health plan changes, always that are on the table. The mayor pointed out that the salaries, we can take a look at salary reductions. We can take a look at furlough days. We can take a look at no merit increases. And again, a lot of these things cannot be done unilaterally. A lot of these will require negotiations with employee union groups. We can talk about change in shift schedules in police to improve service, potential of eliminating or reducing the police take-home car storage program, the possibility of civilizing public safety support positions to reduce costs, potential of reducing the golf system subsidy, and potentially do some reorganization of some functions to create efficiencies, maybe some departmental reorganizations. We did one this year on the Development Center that did have some cost savings, and we'll take a look at that throughout the organization. I don't think anything is off the table as we go forward at this point. And again, we're not making any recommendations at this point in time. We're just saying that those are some of the things that we think we're going to have to take a look at as we go forward into this fiscal year. This is the most challenging fiscal year we've had in the last couple of decades. This is just a look ahead as to where we're going. We're not going into great detail, but we didn't think it was fair to talk to you about the mid-year changes without giving you the full picture, and at least to take a look forward as to where we're going to be over the next several months. We do have a full council workshop on January 26th to discuss fiscal year 10-11, and we'll get into more detail at that point in time of some of those issues that are out there. You know, we've gone into this and covered this a little bit already. Some of the issues, policy issues that we will have to discuss is whether we're going to use the MAPS use tax to help preserve public safety services in 11, whether or not we're going to add additional public safety officers. And again, we're hearing points on both sides of these issues this morning. Discussion needs to begin regarding additional public funding source to maintain and increase police and fire services, including capital in the future. That's some of the things we've discussed. Another revenue source out there, if we're going to have more police and fire, we probably can't do it under our existing revenue model. And the funding sources could also be used, not just for public safety, it could also be used to restore other essential public services that we've cut over the last several years or may be cutting this next year. One of the other things we need to discuss, and we don't need to do it today, but we're just setting the stage for future discussions, is the MAPS reuse tax. It's projected to generate about $80 million over the life of MAPS Free, the 7 years, 9 months. Some of the things on the table would be to cover the implementation costs of the MAPS program. Over the life of the program, we anticipate that will be about $15.5 million based upon our experience of running MAPS 1, MAPS for Kids, or the Sports Oversight Board. That's a source that can come from, and that is how it's being paid for on the sports facilities projects. It could cover some of the F10, F11 reductions needed in police and fire, and it could be a possible source for public safety capital in the future. All of the money in the MAPS for Kids use tax has been used or is planned to be used for public safety capital. And we don't have a source out there. We've been using the use tax for several years to fill that in, and that has been used for public safety capital. And again, that could be a source to fill us in for public safety capital for a finite period of time. And again, it's $80 million is projected. It's not going to be any more than that. It's so much money over a limited period of time, and we need to be wise as we use that use tax money in the future. And with that, I'd be happy to answer it up to any questions. And I'm sorry I'm the bearer of gloom and doom this morning.
Well, we're going to have several months to discuss the 2011 budget. Does anybody want to say anything, though, this morning? Yeah, Gary?
Well, at the risk of continuing this much further, first I want to applaud staff for the recommendations to finish out the current fiscal year that we're in, regardless of where the 30 positions ends up at some point in time. But I challenge our employees and our citizens to find another city that went through this current year that we're in and going to finish it without more drastic reductions than we've been able to do here. And I think that's a testament to not only the things that have gone on in this city in years past, but our staff and their ability to handle the budget as it stands right now, and I want to applaud them for that. As we head into next year, there's 3 points I'd like to make. Because having sit on the other side of this podium for many years, I know what I would have liked to have heard as a department head out there as we head into the very challenging year that we're sitting in. remember, you saw a slide that said there's going to be asked for 12% cut next year. If you'll go back in the presentation and see the kind of drastic cuts that were required to make 2% cuts, think about what 12% is going to do. I would challenge our department heads to identify services that we currently provide that we will no longer be able to provide. Complete services, not reduce the number of employees providing the same service. We need to think about what it is the public can expect to not get from us anymore because of the current financial situation. We shouldn't burden our employees to do the same kind of work, the same level of work, the same amount of work with less employees and less money to do it with. I would challenge the department heads to come forward with things that say, I can't afford to do this anymore, and I'm including police and fire. We can't do this anymore. I would challenge our employees to recognize we're in a different world. I'm not sure that we'll ever get back to the world we were in 5 years ago. Employees have to understand that things are going to change, all the way from salaries to schedules to what they perform and what they do. If they want to continue to provide excellent service to the citizens of Oklahoma City, they're going to have to think of the new challenges and the new things they're going to have to do out there, and they need to support us in getting those things changed and being that way. And that includes the employee labor groups. They're going to have to understand that things are different, and they should recognize that we're trying every way we can to continue to support them, but it is a different world. And lastly, if those things are accomplished and things come forward from the city manager next year, I would hope that this council supports those issues and understand that things are going to be different. And some pet things may end up going away. You may not be able to get some of the things you like to see done. There may be services that we currently provide that are going to have to be done away with. There's going to be public concern about that. And to get into the nitpicking of, well, can we modify this and can we change this, I think does a disservice to those city employees that have taken long hours of work to create a new look, so to speak, and I would hope that this council brings an understanding of that and is willing to accept the burden of changing the way we do things to create an efficient city in today's economic times. And I'll get off my soapbox.
All right, ready to adjourn? Brian?
I'd like to make a request that using some of the new numbers, that there would be a revised projection over the time of MAPS 3 revenue collections. I mean, I think that when that projection was made, it was before some of this other stuff came in. So,
not significantly different. We projected off of some down revenue years, the last revenue time frames. The December check's a little bit worse, but it shouldn't change the overall projection significantly.
All right, ready to adjourn the Finance Committee? All right, we're adjourned. Thank you. Thanks, staff.